Chapter 2149. Wei Wei Bai sneered. How is that possible? Other than the targets, I feel disgusted by everyone. Speaking of which, Wei Wei Bai suddenly frowned. That's strange. Although each plane has a different target, I don't know why I feel that I can relax when I find the target, but as long as I think of other people, the system's face twitched. What was with the soul compatibility? There were so many planes. Even if their personalities and bodies were different, the soul compatibility was terrifyingly high. Yi Yuxuan's soul fragment also didn't recognize Wei Wei Bai. But no matter what Wei Wei Bai's personality or appearance was, she was still instinctively attracted to him. Of course, Wei Wei Bai was the same. Her brain, rationality, and analysis couldn't recognize the constantly changing Yi Yuxuan. But the soul had recognized her long ago. Of course, the body didn't reject it. Instead of saying that the soul fragment fell in love with the person played by Wei Wei Bai, it was better to say that they fell in love with the same soul. Of course, the system didn't dare to say this. It had to break them up in the future. At that time, if Wei Wei Bai knew that her targets were the same person, and fell in love with Yi Yuxuan in reality, then he would not only be destroyed by Yi Yuxuan. The host would probably beat him into a pig's head. It was really the only system in history to be able to do this. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while, just when the system was worried that she thought of something. She sighed calmly. Forget it, why think so much? Just relax. The system, as expected, the host had no bottom line. Suddenly, the blanket moved, and the fluffy Zero crawled out of the blanket. He half closed his eyes in a daze, and there was a trace of satisfaction on his face. It was as if he had a very beautiful dream. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting, her long hair draped over her shoulders, half of her face hidden in the shadows, half bright and delicate, and half indifferent and peaceful. She was wearing a long-sleeved mail jacket, looking down at him. After a while, Zero realized that he wasn't wearing any clothes. His face immediately turned red, and his eyelashes trembled. When he reached out, he realized that his fingers were covered with her hair. He clenched his fists, but he didn't dare to use too much force. He was worried that he would hurt her, so he loosened his fingers and let her hair fall onto the bed. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were indifferent. You're awake. Get up and eat. These calm words, this face of a scumbag who did not recognize him last night. Zero was also at a loss. Although she was shy, she didn't know what was wrong with her. Wei Wei Bai observed Zero's expression and confirmed that the memories of the main personality were different. That was fine too. Otherwise, it would have been too unkind of her to force herself on the primary personality yesterday. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she got off the bed and changed her clothes. Zero got up and wrapped herself in the blanket. Her blank face was soft, and her blue eyes were pure and shy. He glanced at Wei Wei Bai and pursed his lips. He wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Apart from shyness, he also felt sad. Wei Wei Bai didn't feel burdened at all. Anyway, Siwa didn't remember what happened yesterday, right? Also, as psychics, they had good stamina. After so much trouble yesterday, there were almost no traces left today. Also, their bodies weren't tired. Other than forgetting to put on his clothes, there was basically no evidence. After Wei Wei Bai put on his clothes, she turned around and saw Siwa with his head lowered. The tips of his ears were red, and his fingers were nervously clutching the blanket. Suddenly, he said something softly. His voice was too soft to hear clearly. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion. What's wrong? Zero finally looked up and asked nervously, Could you be pregnant, Wei Wei? Chapter 2150. Wei Wei Bai felt a chill on her back. Was Zero still thinking about the child's name? She could give birth to a ghost. No, she couldn't even give birth to a ghost. Bai Wei Wei rubbed her goosebumps on her arms and didn't continue to think about the child. Anyway, it was just a night of relaxation. Young people would make this kind of mistake. As for the child, there was no need to think too much about it. Wei Wei Bai threw a bucket of life source to Zero. After eating and drinking, she dragged him a train. Zero's ability hadn't been tested yet, but the way he killed the monsters last time shocked the people in the base. It was the first time they saw a psychic chasing after a group of monsters. Even psychics couldn't take the initiative to this extent when facing a monster tide. Fourth baby was the weakest. Wei Wei Bai dragged him to the base square. There was a special barrier here. It was the place where the mercenary group fought and trained. When she brought Zero to the square, everyone fell silent. A girl with a serious face, but she was definitely not old. He was standing at the edge of the square with a slender but thin blonde youth. It looked like a weak combination, but it made people take a step back. After all, everyone knew that they were the last two psychics in the base. They were also the strongest. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the light screen in the training ground. She pointed and said, "Attack that light shield. It will record your strength." Zero obediently reached out and flashed to the light shield. He didn't use much strength and hit it. Then the light shield broke. It was like a chain reaction. A series of light shields also broke. For any human, the defense of the light shield was invincible. Even psychics could use it to test how strong they were. If they didn't use special abilities, they couldn't break this thing. Zero saw that the light shield broke and immediately retreated to Wei Wei Bai's side. He lowered his head and tugged at Wei Wei Bai's clothes. "Do I have to pay for it? I didn't do it on purpose. I was very light." He felt that the light shield was very weak and had already reduced his strength, but it still broke. Wei Wei Bai, where's the weakest personality that only knows how to cry? Next, she let Zero try a few more things. In the end, without exception, everything he touched shattered. No wonder the monster's head was like tofu putting under his fingernails. This kind of power had already surpassed the limits of human beings. No matter how powerful an Esper was, he was still a human. He could only stimulate the limits of a human's abilities. But Zero's ability was clearly not that of a human. When it was time for lunch, Wei Wei Bai dragged him along to test her skills. She discovered that his strength could allow him to survive in the apocalypse. She waved her hand. "Let's go back." It was similar to calling a puppy. Like a puppy, Zero immediately wagged its tail and tugged at Wei Wei Bai's clothes to leave with her. After they left, everyone in the square began to tremble. It was too scary just now. As for the leader of the mercenary group, he thought that the human base had lost so many superpowered people and Wei Wei Bai was too young. He felt that there was no future for the base and planned to leave with his mercenary group. But today, he was suddenly glad that he didn't leave. Zero was such a terrifying weapon. If he was his enemy, he would definitely die. What was even more terrifying was that Wei Wei Bai could actually make such a terrifying monster listen to her. Wei Wei Bai took care of Zero for a long time. They were together almost every day. She also sent him out on some missions. She found that the completion rate was very high and it was very easy. What Wei Wei Bai found strange was that the other personalities seemed to be in a deep sleep, leaving only Fourth Baby to jump around. Could it be that the master was really so kind? She said that she liked Fourth Baby, so he really only let Fourth Baby out? She originally wanted to use this period of time to raise the favorability of one personality to the maximum. But the strange thing was that the favorability didn't change. Wei Wei Bai tried a few times. She even kissed him good morning and good night, but Zero's favorability didn't increase at all, although 88 favorable impression points were auspicious. But she liked 100 more. A month passed unhurriedly. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the documents of the base. Next to her, Zero was lying on the table, staring at her with a gentle but deep gaze. But every time she looked up, the deep gaze in his eyes would disappear. It turned into a bright and bright smile. Wei Wei Bai thought calmly. Why didn't the favorability increase? Could it be that it was harder to increase it later? Suddenly, she felt a wave of nausea. Wei Wei Bai suddenly got up and rushed to the bathroom. Zero's pupils shrank, and he immediately followed. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. She felt very uncomfortable. What was going on? Zero looked nervous and ran over with a warm water. Wei Wei, are you still feeling uncomfortable? At the beginning, all children are like this. Wei Wei Bai took the warm water and rinsed her mouth. Then she denied. I'm still thinking about the child. It's impossible. Zero blinked. Then he suddenly picked her up and rushed out. Let's go see a doctor. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had eaten overnight food and had food poisoning. But when the test results came out, congratulations, you're pregnant for a month. Wei Wei Bai and the system. Huh? What the hell? What happened to infertility? //T. Chapter 2151. Confusion, Shock, and Disbelief. This was the feeling that Wei Wei Bai and the system shared. When Zero heard that she was pregnant, his eyes were blank for a moment, but that beautiful blue was slowly replaced by a happy and beautiful light. Although the main personality would not lie. It even said that there was a high probability that she would have a child. But he still didn't feel anything substantial and even needed a month. Wei Wei didn't feel anything strange, so he thought that there wouldn't be this time. Child, his and Wei Wei's child. Zero suddenly smiled. His smile was very cute and silly. He reached out and hooked his arm around the girl who had been staring blankly at the test results, one finger, following the gap between her fingers. As if he wanted to grab happiness, he carefully and gently held her fingers. So happy. Ding, fourth baby's favorability is at 90. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, but didn't have much of a reaction. Then she continued, fiddling with the examination machine, and checked again. But the robot's voice was still so stiff and calm. Congratulations, you are pregnant. In fact, there was even an additional select button. Do you want to choose the pregnancy precautions? Wei Wei Bai immediately clicked no, and then said to Zero, I'm going to be alone, don't follow me. There were so many planes, she thought that a storm was coming. When she saw the word pregnant, her mind went blank. The system was flipping through the information, and it also checked Wei Wei Bai's body. How could she be pregnant? A host who had transmigrated planes couldn't be pregnant. This was simply beyond his imagination. It had been so many years since he was born, plus the history of the system world. There wasn't a single pregnancy incident, unless the host was forced to stay in the plane, and it was certain that they couldn't be saved, then they could be forced to change their body by the power of the plane. Only then there was the possibility of pregnancy. Otherwise, wait, forced to stay in the plane? The system immediately sped up the examination. What he checked was different from what the robot checked, but to check Wei Wei Bai's soul. Sure enough, there was a sticky force. Golden sticky force. The male lead of this plane was too strong. Not only was he strong, but he also had 4 personalities. It was way more difficult than the usual strategy. If it was a normal raid target, the reward would be 30 HP. In that case, this plane was at least of high difficulty, and the reward would be 10 times more valuable. But the plane was still stuck at normal difficulty. Had some kind of power tampered with the plane they had transmigrated to? Ling watched as Wei Wei Bai left. He wanted to follow her, but he didn't dare to. He could only walk around hesitantly. What should he do? Wei Wei was pregnant. Having a child would make one weak. It was similar to superpowers. Superpowers would also be affected. She wouldn't be angry, right? Because she would feel weak. In the apocalypse, a weak person was equivalent to a person waiting for death. Zero clenched his fists tightly. He would protect her. Suddenly, his expression changed. His hair turned grayish blue, and his eyes turned a bewitching reddish brown. The bewitching beauty on his originally pure face blossomed with a dense, evil aura. Pregnant, without waiting for the personality change, Zero's eyes turned blue again. His blue eyes were no longer light, but a deep and gloomy blue. There was even a trace of hostility. Get in, don't think of hurting her. The main personality didn't suppress him. Even if he was the weakest, he would never compromise with the other personalities. /T. Chapter 2152. Wei Wei was pregnant and was at her most vulnerable. He would fight to the death with anyone who dared to hurt her. His pupils trembled violently, and the pain made him sweat profusely. His muscles were twitching, but in the end his hair turned completely golden, and his eyes returned to their light blue color. Ling stood in place, sweating profusely. The gentle gentleness on his face was replaced by a cold determination. His fingers dug into the flesh of his palm. Although it healed quickly, there were still traces of blood on his fingernails. This mark reminded him that he had just experienced a lot of fierce battles and defenses. Ling panted and slowly calmed his stiff body. After a long time, he relaxed his expression. Then he raised his head again and showed the harmless, soft, and innocent smile that Wei Wei liked the most. Ling went through a lesson on what to pay attention to after pregnancy. He was going to be a father now, so he had to start learning how to protect the mother of the child. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled as she took out a cigarette. Wait, pregnant women can't smoke. So she put the cigarette back. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had not seen enough, or else why would you be scared by pregnancy? It was just pregnancy. It was just a child, right? It was more. A child. A child. What should she do? The host was about to go berserk and turn into a giant dinosaur, spitting fire everywhere. The system finally checked and shouted, "Don't worry, you won't be able to give birth." Wei Wei Bai, the system emphasized, "Really, I guarantee that you won't be able to give birth." Wei Wei Bai, this line feels so scary, so evil, and so dark. The system said, "The male lead of this world is too much. His ability should be considered S difficulty level in the system world, but the missions we do are all in easy mode, and very few of them are in medium difficulty. So our ability is not compatible with the male lead's ability." In fact, after transmigrating to this world, the sudden change in the male lead was also very confusing. The system said that's why he can change your body and break half of the rules of transmigration. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Is that so? Did something go wrong with the transmigration? This was a very bad thing. In the past, he had always relied on the omniscience and omnipotence of the system, as well as all kinds of rules that were not wrong. Once the system made a mistake, the difficulty of her strategy would increase exponentially. The system said, "But the rules of your body haven't changed. You can't leave behind life in this plane. This is a hard and fast rule. Even if you can get pregnant, you can't give birth. The child in your belly is actually a virtual product." Wei Wei Bai didn't think that there was anything wrong with her IQ. Why couldn't he understand this explanation? The system tried its best to explain that is, although the male lead changed your body, causing you to have to get pregnant, it conflicts with your setting of not being able to leave a life behind. The two powers are currently in a state of conflict, causing the child in your stomach to look real, but in reality, it has already been killed off by the rules. Wei Wei Bai, was her stomach a square? Anyone could come in and fight? The system said, "So you don't have a child now, but looks like you do. Of course, you will be pregnant for 10 months and give birth to an airball. Or you can stuff a durian coconut, and then you will give birth to this." Wei Wei Bai suddenly remembered that there was a plane where she couldn't give birth either. // Chapter 2153. Although she could simulate a pillow. But in that world, she wasn't even pregnant. It was just a simulation. And now, her state was indeed pregnant, but there was no child. Wasn't this the legendary fantasy, fake pregnancy? The system suddenly looked serious. But this time, the rules won, but next time it may not be. So in this world, you must not have any physiological activities with the male lead. You must not. If there was a next physiological lesson, the power of the rules no longer had the ability to stop it. She would definitely get pregnant. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time before she understood. Okay, I understand. The system was getting more and more unreliable. All kinds of tricks to cheat the host. Wei Wei Bai knew that it was a fake pregnancy. Although she felt a little regretful, she was more relaxed. If she really had a child, what would she do in the future? She had to leave. Leave the child here? Then wouldn't she be a scumbag and a scumbag mother? Forget it. She had to have a child in reality. She must not have one in this world. Bai Weiwei suddenly felt nauseous again. She rushed to the bathroom and vomited out her bile. This morning sickness was the real deal, without any discount. Suddenly, a gentle hand appeared on her back. He patted her gently, his blue eyes full of worry. Weiwei, your reaction is a little big. Are you very uncomfortable? Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to think about where Zero came from. After she rinsed her mouth and washed her face, she said, I'm fine. At least she didn't have to worry about what to do if the child was really born. No, she knew that the child was fake. Just hit her directly. Vomiting like this made her feel uncomfortable. This was the end of the world. She was lying flat, not at the mercy of others. Zero gently and strongly hugged her, as if he was carrying a princess, and put her on the bed. His innocent and naive expression had a few more wisps of wisdom and maturity. Although his appearance didn't change, she could feel that he was no longer that naive and sweet. He almost knelt on one knee by the bed, holding her hand with both hands, and promised seriously, "Don't be afraid. Leave the future to me." At this point, Zero's thick eyelashes lifted slightly, revealing the determination and seriousness in his eyes. "Other than the knowledge of pregnancy, I have also learned the knowledge of childbirth. When the time comes, I will help you deliver the baby." When Wei Wei Bai saw that he looked like he was going to be a father, she was worried that the greater the expectations, the greater the disappointment. So after thinking for a while, she reached out and touched his hair. "I'm not ready yet." Zero squinted his eyes in comfort and said, "It's okay. I'll be a good father. If you're not ready, I can even play the role of a mother." How could this child not be so serious and pure? Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She really didn't have the face to say that she wanted to hit him. Once he said that he was worried, her favorability towards him immediately dropped to zero. Zero reached out and carefully hugged her waist. He rested his face on her thigh. This was a posture of incomparable dependence. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, was thinking about finding an opportunity to make the air egg in her stomach. Pregnancy was simply too unbearable. During this period of time, Wei Wei Bai was still thinking about how to get rid of the air egg. She began to feel extremely weak. The system explained faintly, "The male lead's ability is too strong. Even if it's fake, the remaining power is still desperately trying to exploit your energy." Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked at some pregnant women's medicine and sour pregnant women's fruits that Zero brought. He even personally went to find the ingredients to cook. He didn't allow her to eat the sticky nutrient solution. As a father, Zero was really responsible. Chapter 2154. She was on standby almost 24 hours a day. Moreover, as her body was getting weaker, she actually started to feel sleepy. She fell into a deep sleep almost as soon as she lay down. Seeing Wei Wei Bai close her eyes and fall asleep again, Zero frowned. Although it was normal for pregnant women to feel sleepy in the early stages. However, Wei Wei Bai's body was abnormally weak. Zero reached out and touched her stomach. He could feel the beating of life inside. It seemed a little lively. This was different from the knowledge in the knowledge manual for pregnant women. Zero thought for a moment, pursed his lips, and made a decision. He closed his eyes, and his blonde hair suddenly turned black. His expression instantly turned cold and calm. His eyelashes fluttered. A golden light appeared in his eyes. Zero's hand was still on her stomach. There seemed to be some fluctuations in Zero's calm eyes. He seemed to be at a loss, but in the end, there was a gentle gentleness. Was it a child? He stared at the child in her stomach for a while, and his golden eyes darkened. After a while, the gentleness in his deep golden eyes disappeared bit by bit. He regained his calmness. He sat beside her and listened to her light breathing. Finally, he covered his eyes and slowly closed them. His thin lips moved slightly. "You're a little lively, but it's okay. Eat more nutritious food, and the child will be born smoothly." The child will be born. The desire for children was an innate genetic inheritance. Therefore, Zero told everyone to protect the child's birth. Then, he suppressed the other personalities and let the weakest one continue to appear. In fact, he had already planned to digest this personality, because his love for Wei Wei Bai had already surpassed that. However, Wei Wei Bai was pregnant. Pregnant women could not be stimulated, so he could only let this personality continue to exist. Wei Wei Bai slept until her head was spinning. When she woke up, she saw Zero waiting for her with breakfast. He saw that she had woken up a basin of warm water, a towel, and a toothbrush. Everything had been prepared. Zero blinked his blue eyes. "Wei Wei, I'll help you brush your teeth and wash your face." Wei Wei Bai immediately refused. "I'll do it myself. I'm not crippled." Zero was like a little husky wagging its tail, circling around her excitedly. "After you fell asleep yesterday, I helped you take care of all the matters in the base. Recently, there have been mercenary groups that have gone out to kill monsters. I've also sent people to help. As for the monster horde, you don't have to worry. I'll take care of it." He would protect her base. In this apocalypse, he would let the entire world know that this was the safest paradise. Wei Wei nodded indifferently. She was also disgusted in the morning, and her body was soft. Was pregnancy that scary? How could his body be so weak? Seeing that she had finished washing up, Zero immediately fed her with a spoon. This is to suppress the nausea. Wei Wei held it in her mouth. It was sweet and sour, and it was especially cool and delicious. The discomfort in his body was immediately relieved. Wei Wei relaxed her brows, and Zero immediately smiled happily. Wei Wei hesitated for the 1,000th and 100th time. Fuck, why did I suggest to hit the air eggs? Looking at this loyal little puppy's face, I can't bring myself to say it. After dinner, Wei Wei went for a walk. The loyal little puppy pulled on the corner of her clothes and happily followed her. When the two big shots of the base came out for a walk, everyone seemed to be more diligent. As they walked, Wei Wei felt that something was wrong. She turned around and saw that the loyal little puppy was walking and nodding. Nodding and closing his eyes, he was taking a nap. Wei Wei asked suspiciously, "Wait, isn't he sleeping?" Chapter 2155. The system said, "Ever since he found out you were pregnant, he has never closed his eyes." Wei Wei was shocked. It had been at least more than a week. He had not died yet. Ling suddenly raised his head and opened his eyes, looking very confused. Then his eyes were filled with gray, and irritable greed appeared. His hair turned silver gray, like moonlight pouring down on him. He slowly curved his lips, exaggeratedly and crazily. "I've been hungry for a long time, damn it. Why didn't you let me out?" Wei Wei looked at the loyal little dog behind her, who had turned into a berserk dog. She rubbed her nose uncomfortably and kept looking at fourth baby. The sudden appearance of third baby was especially shocking. The berserk dog's gray eyes were almost vertical, and he shook off Wei Wei's clothes. Then he stretched. "Okay, I'm gonna hunt. The place last time was not bad." Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly thought of something and stared at Wei Wei fiercely. "Woman, what do you mean you're pregnant? You have a baby." Wei Wei was expressionless. She looked at him up and down, and suddenly felt like she could hit an egg on the air. "No, you're wrong. I'm not pregnant." After she finished speaking, she immediately took a few steps back and took the opportunity to solve this problem when third baby came out. Otherwise, when fourth baby came out, she would not be able to say anything when his sad and loyal face looked at her. Third baby snorted in disdain. "I saw the thing in your stomach. So troublesome. I have to take responsibility for boss." "Forget it. It's the same body anyway." After he finished speaking, he suddenly rushed over. He picked up Wei Wei and quickly disappeared from where he was. He came to the monster's nest last time and put her on a harmless leaf. "Wait, I'll talk after I'm full." After he finished speaking, he disappeared. Wei Wei almost rolled her eyes. "I'll eat you to death." She saw third baby leave and said to the system, "Quick, let's go back and solve this." She was too weak, and she did not want to keep being pregnant. But when she raised her hand, she found. Where was her ability? The system said, "You don't have enough energy in your body, so your superpower is gone." Wei Wei, that's not right. Which pregnant woman drains energy so quickly like me? What am I pregnant with? Although it was fake, the energy was real. So her pregnancy was exactly the same as in reality. The system said, "The male lead's energy is very strong. I'm now calculating the effect of this speed of exploitation on your body." Wei Wei suddenly saw the silver-haired Sanhua suddenly appear in front of her like a small beast baring its teeth and brandishing its claws. He looked her up and down, his sharp eyes carrying a terrifying heat that was like a raging fire. Then he lowered his head and sniffed the side of her neck, his teeth nibbling. Her scent was so appealing to him. I really want to bite him. However, when he thought about her pregnancy, his brain, which was usually filled with hunger, finally had some common knowledge about pregnancy. That was what the weakest personality learned every day. Because he was the weakest, all of his memories were shared. Although the other three did not come out, their minds were filled with pregnancy knowledge every day. And she had become weak, very weak. It was as if a gentle touch would kill him. Really, so troublesome. Zero narrowed his eyes and suddenly hugged her, his voice low and hoarse. Let's go. I'm full. After that, they disappeared. Wei Wei Bai was back at the base in the blink of an eye. Zero put her on a chair and then pulled out a bunch of beautiful wild fruits from God knows where. Download the at https://m Sashu.com save button at the bottom to record this chapter. The next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it, if you like. Chapter 2156. This thing is very nutritious. I'm not a vegetarian. You can have it. After saying that, his sharp gray eyes showed a hint of blue. Zero frowned impatiently, his voice even a little sharp. Are you worried that I'll kill her? Do you think you're the only one who knows how to protect people? After he finished speaking, Zero looked up at Bai Wei Wei, and his movements were a little more bashful. Call me if there's nothing to eat. I'll definitely share some with you when I'm full. Pregnant women will starve to death if they don't have anything to eat. After saying that, Zero closed his eyes and fell to the ground. Ding! Sanwa's favorability has increased to 40. So Sanwa came out to show his attitude as a father? The favorability actually increased. Wei Wei Bai looked at the wild fruits on the ground, then looked at Zero, who was sleeping like a dead pig. Just because she was pregnant, the favorability increased. Was it really the best strategy to take the ball? Wei Wei Bai was thinking about how much favorability the air egg could get when her eyelids became heavy. Sleepiness made her close her eyes. On the ground, Zero only closed his eyes for a few minutes, then suddenly opened them. His gray eyes turned into a charming reddish-brown. He slowly got up, revealing a demonic smile that could make people go crazy. His lazy voice could seduce people. What a pity you're pregnant. He got up and came to her side, lazily holding his chin, squinting at Wei Wei Bai for a long time. Then he gently kissed her without any seduction. Consider this a gift for you. Boss is so cruel. He actually made you pregnant. Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel something and opened her eyes vigilantly. She found that the fruits on the ground were still by her feet, and there was a bouquet of beautiful red roses on her lap. It looked like it had just been picked. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Who gave it to me?" The system said, "Erwa. When you were asleep, Erwa gave you flowers. Dewa came out to touch your stomach. Then Siwa woke up to make lunch for you." Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt the benefits of being a mother. Didn't this group of bastards look down on her? He had an empty stomach, so why was he suddenly so attentive to her? Wei Wei Bai tried to say, "Why don't we hold on for another 2 months before we consider aborting it?" The system joked, 2 months might not be enough. You have to hold on until the production. Wei Wei Bai seriously considered this plan. Seeing that she was seriously considering it, the system decided to pull the host back a little. Don't drag the time until the birth. Otherwise, how are you going to explain the birth of an empty balloon? Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and rubbed her chin like a profiteer. Are there any dolls in the supermarket that can be children? The kind of robot child that can grow up, talk, and take exams? The system replied, "Yes, but it's a little expensive." Wei Wei Bai asked sensitively, "How much HP?" The system replied, "Even the cheapest one costs 5,000 HP. Wei Wei Bai gasped, "It's too expensive. Is there anything else?" The system replied, "It's the cheapest one. There's really nothing else that can replace it." Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, "Can you become a child?" The system blurted out, "I'm just like a child now. I'm cuter now." Wei Wei Bai hesitated. "Can you pretend to be a child when the time comes?" The system was speechless. Wei Wei Bai said, "Just pretend for a while. If you can't pretend anymore after the birth, you can kill yourself." The system was speechless. Giving birth to a child and giving birth to a system is just a joke. It's not realistic. Wake up, host. Where's your backbone? You have to rely on yourself. What's the point of relying on a child? No, rely on the system. Have some shame. Download the at https://m Sashu.com say button below to record this chapter. Chapter 2157. In the end, Wei Wei Bai didn't really give birth to a system, and then let the system pretend to commit suicide. But the action of hitting the airball delayed her until a month later. About 2 months ago, Mention this kind of thing again, and must mention it to Dawa. Wei Wei Bai looked at Zero's back facing her, and his voice was very calm as he gave the order. The matters of the base were all taken care of by him. Because she was pregnant, the base was closed for the time being. There was no conflict with any base, but whoever dared to provoke them would be destroyed. Wei Wei Bai held a cup of milk. The milk was processed by the wild fruit juice, and the taste didn't make her nauseous. She looked up at Zero. The teenager was a few centimeters taller, and the shirt he was wearing was also brand new. If she hadn't reminded him, he probably forgot to throw away the label of supplies on it. The beautiful back was slightly bent, and the soft couch of the shirt line was a little more supported. It looked even more tall and strong. Fourth baby was no longer soft and fluffy like before. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyelashes and thought calmly. Before she finished drinking the milk, a hand gently held her wrist, very soft, as if worried that she would be frightened. Zero squatted, gently touching her soft body. Under the delicate and beautiful eyelashes, a pair of sky-blue eyes were unusually pure. He whispered softly, "There's no more milk. I'll pour some for you. When the wild fruit juice is finished, I'll go out and pick some." This was the super nutritious food produced in the monster's nest. Ability users didn't dare to enter the monster's nest, but for a few wild fruits. Zero calculated the time, when to pick a few baskets. In addition, he was afraid that freezing would affect the taste, so he picked fresh every time. Wei Wei Bai smiled and reached out to rub his hair. Sure enough, she saw him squint comfortably. Ding! Fourth baby's favorability is at 93. During this time of getting along, the favorability would increase from time to time. It seemed to be the accumulation of favorability in life. This was the model of loving you a little bit more every day. Wei Wei Bai finished the milk and drank a cup of wild fruit juice. The air in her stomach finally stopped tormenting her. If it weren't for this kind of old nest wild fruit, she would probably be disgusted to death by morning sickness this month. After Wei Wei Bai finished drinking, she fell asleep again. This time, she had a nightmare. She dreamed that Wa suddenly appeared and looked at her coldly. They were in a blank space. There was almost no emotion in Zero's golden eyes. His fingers gently caressed her stomach. His cold voice sounded a little more human. "Is it very uncomfortable?" he asked in a low voice. Wei Wei Bai felt that this dream was strange, but she didn't let herself go easily because of the dream. Therefore, she revealed a gentle smile. "There's nothing I can do about it." Which mother doesn't feel uncomfortable? But the child is the most important. Zero's fingers paused slightly. He lowered his head, and his black hair fell on both sides of his fair face. His expression was still holy and calm. After a long time, he seemed to sigh. "You've worked hard. After the child is born, I will set up a merit monument for you." Wei Wei Bai, what era is this antique from? There is indeed a merit monument in the early days of the apocalypse. It was for those heroes who made a great contribution to saving the apocalypse but failed in the end. It's been hundreds of years. Who still remembers about the merit monument? Even if Delwa is dreaming, he's still super old-fashioned. Chapter 2158. Wei Wei Bai reached out and very calmly and boldly wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, she sat in his arms like a big cat. She reached out and twirled his hair unhurriedly. The golden strands of hair coiled around her fingertips. It was so beautiful that it was like sunlight flowing. Zero's face, which was as white as snow, had a few more strange fluctuations. His calm golden eyes also reflected her casual and languid face. She was really not afraid of him. She was not afraid that he would hurt her. Wei Wei Bai imitated fourth baby's soft smile, and there was no trace of coldness in her eyes. It was also the first time Zero saw her face him like this. This kind of soft and defenseless appearance was only seen by the weakest personality. Her breathing was a little weak, but it carried the scent of her body. It smelled very good and did not cause him to reject it. Zero let her do as she pleased. It was as if an adult was indulging an insensible child, and there was always a little more restraint and tolerance. Wei Wei Bai found a comfortable position, reached out and hugged his waist, and buried her head in his neck. She even thought that his hair was too long and brushed it away for him. Her breath blew on the skin of his neck. It was soft and full of vitality. It was like the fragrance of a wild tree. Just when Zero thought that she was just looking for a position to sleep, Wei Wei Bai, who only thought that she was dreaming, could be sleeping in a dream. She could only dream if she was asleep. Wasn't it a waste of energy to dream that she was sleeping? So she was like a kitten, gently teasing him, and her breath became heavier. Zero, what name do you plan to give your child? Except for fourth baby, the rest of the children were all scumbags. So Wei Wei Bai used this to tease him. Zero was silent, as if this question was beyond his ability. After a long time, he reacted. It depends on what ability he has. My body is very corrosive, and most of the child's genetic inheritance will be robbed, so that child will be very like me, and his ability will be very powerful. When he said this kind of words, he was very calm and gentle, like a professor teaching. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of joy or popularity. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but laugh. You're so funny. I just asked you to think of a name. Do you think the child will look like you in the future? Zero's indifferent and deep eyes had a few more traces of gentleness. He looked at her, his voice low and hoarse. Then, what do you want to name him? The girl who was rolling around in his dream was casually and naturally leaning against his ear. This is the authority I gave to his father. Whoever becomes his father can name him. Her breath was so warm. Even the tip of Zero's ears, which had remained indifferent, turned slightly red. He stared at her without moving and finally sighed softly. I will give him a name before he is born. However, Wei Wei Bai reached out her hand and lightly tapped his forehead. Her eyes were filled with beautiful sparkles, and her temperament was unbelievably gentle. You wish. I'll acknowledge whoever treats me well as my father. If you dare to treat me badly, I won't let you name it. She was flamboyant and reckless. However, there was no perverse hostility. Instead, it was gentle and presumptuous. It was a very strange and comfortable way of getting along. Zero was silent for a long time. His fingers moved and finally landed on the end of her hair. His fingers entwined with her long hair. It seemed to be entangled with her fate, unreasonable and with a trace of tenderness. Ding, Dawa's favorability is at 25. Chapter 2159. Wei Wei Bai immediately woke up and found herself lying in Zero's arms. His thick eyelashes covered his eyes, and he seemed to have fallen into an unknown deep sleep. Wei Wei Bai saw the ends of her hair being held tightly by his fingers. She couldn't help but say, "Why would I dream of that little bastard? That irresponsible scumbag of a father." Zero's eyelashes trembled, and his golden eyes flowed out as he looked at her calmly. Wei Wei Bai widened her eyes and looked at his hair color. It was still blonde. In other words, Zero was now at the intersection of the two personalities. Zero pursed his lips and sighed indifferently. Then he slowly closed his eyes. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time. Usually, the person in charge didn't even dare to say a word. She scolded him, but he came out quickly. Zero woke up quickly. His blue eyes were a little dazed, but he saw Wei Wei Bai curled up in his arms. He couldn't help but smile. Are you hungry? I'll get you a nutritious drink. Because it was easy to digest and didn't make her feel disgusted, this was her favorite drink. He always remembered that pregnant women needed to eat more and less. All kinds of nutritious and delicious things were what he asked the mercenary group to find. The base didn't need to rely on hunting monsters to operate. He could invent some gadgets that were worth a lot of money. If sold, it would be enough for the base to operate perfectly. As for which base dared to rob their base, oh, they were all buried in the greenhouse as fertilizer. Zero's back was facing Wei Wei Bai. His blue eyes were a little dark and cold. But when he thought of Wei Wei Bai, the coldness disappeared. Seeing Zero go out to make a fresh drink, Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but knock on the system. Did Dawa come out just now? The system carefully opened the trash can. He has the ability to enter dreams. His favorability increased by 5 points. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's unusually dull voice. What's wrong with you? The system clung to the edge of the trash can. I was worried that you would suddenly think of a good strategy for pregnant women. So you wanted me to pretend to be a baby and then pretend to commit suicide. The host seemed to be joking. But after looking at the host's bottom line for a long time, the host's bottom line was shameless. He couldn't believe it. Wei Wei Bai coughed twice and said, "Really, I won't let you pretend to be a child anymore. I'm not that cruel." Furthermore, Zero was so powerful that even if he was worried that the host would come out, he would not be able to fool him. If he destroyed it, where's she going to find 00 for? The host seemed to be probably almost ruthless. Wei Wei Bai drank some drinks and ate some fresh vegetable and meat porridge. These were all things that Zero had learned from looking up ancient menus on the internet at the last minute. No matter how Wei Wei Bai looked at him, she felt that Siwa was really a good man. It was a must-have at home. With such a father, how could a mother not feel gratified? The person in charge was hard-working and considerate of her, guarding her 24/7. Where could she find such a good man? Marry him. Wei Wei Bai did as she said. After all, 0 favorable impression points were accumulated. She had been in the base for so long, and it was time for her to conquer a new personality. She would conquer Siwa first, then think of a way to conquer Sanhua, the one with a hole in his head. He was even more foolish than Siwa. It wasn't necessarily a strategy for love. Sanhua was just feeding him food. It was guaranteed that he would gain favorable impression points. Because a person full of hunger, as long as he was given delicious food, how could he not gain favorable impression points? She came from the empire of big foodies and cooked a few meals for Sanhua. T. Chapter 2160. It was guaranteed that his favorability level would increase. The system knew Wei Wei Bai's thoughts. After a long silence, he said faintly, "Just say that you want to kill the other personalities. Don't beat around the bush about cooking biochemical weapons." Yi Yuxuan was such a strong person. She almost died in the hospital. Where did the host get the confidence that her cooking could not poison the male protagonist to death? Wei Wei Bai was calm and confident. It's okay. People always have a chance to improve, learn more, and improve. The system said, learn more, and you'll be able to poison people to death. This idea was even more terrifying than him pretending to be a child. The host could not be blamed. Although she was holding an empty egg, she was really pregnant. Therefore, a pregnant host could think of anything. It was 100 times more lethal than a normal host. 0 held the water and washed Wei Wei Bai's feet. Yes, feet. This person had evolved to the point where he could do anything. She washed herself, and he looked at her with a pitiful face of being abandoned. Tears almost rolled down his cheeks. In the end, Wei Wei Bai could not resist this hateful gaze. Just let him be. 0 lowered his head and sat on the stool, casually talking about the base's income and expenses. Men had to let the child's mother know that she was very safe and had a stable income. She could support the child. 0 slowly. His attitude was unusually focused, without a trace of blasphemy. He carefully wrapped her feet up. Then he lowered his head and gently wiped. Her white toes were round and cute. 0 stared at them, afraid that she would hurt them. Don't use too much strength, he's strong. Every day, he would go out and squeeze iron, then squeeze cotton. He wanted to know the strength of crushing iron and the strength of squeezing cotton. He wanted her to feel the soft and comfortable strength of his fingers. Wei Wei Bai was stuffed on a bed by him, and he wanted to get some water. She casually flipped through the book, reading page by page. When it was about time, 0 came back and poured her a cup of sour drink. His method of making fresh nutritional products was getting better and better. 0 took the book away from her and kissed her gently on the head. Don't tire yourself out. It's time to rest. Wei Wei Bai was stuffed with a drink by him. She lowered her head and drank it calmly. 0 originally wanted to take the book away, but the thing on the page made him pause. Then he flipped it open. It was actually a wedding dress. Wei Wei Bai leaned against the back of the bed and combed her hair back with ease. Then she smiled and said, "Recently, I've suddenly fallen in love with these ancient wedding clothes. The current apocalypse no longer had a wedding system. Just go for whoever you like. How could there be such a troublesome matter in a precarious life?" 0's blue pupils constricted. His fingers slowly slid across the pages of the beautiful white wedding dress. "I'll make it for you, Wei Wei." If Wei Wei liked it, he could get whatever she wanted. Wei Wei Bai felt that her reminder was clear enough. but Zero's mind was still stiff. However, the apocalypse didn't have a wedding system, so it wasn't his fault that he couldn't think of anything. Zero had already lowered his head and was seriously looking through the wedding dresses. He made sure that the loose ones wouldn't make Wei Wei feel uncomfortable and strangle the child. Under the light, his eyelashes had a faint halo that fell into his eyes that were as quiet as the blue sky. There was gentleness and focus. Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly until he raised his head. She said casually, "Do you know about the ancient wedding system?" Zero was still thinking about how to improve the wedding dress, so he nodded blankly. Wei Wei Bai lightly pressed against his shoulder. Her voice was calm, but had a shocking warmth. "I'll marry you, okay?" Zero's hand froze, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2161. Can I marry you? This sentence came out of her mouth, light and sweet. It's the kind of sweetness that can make people feel numb. Zero even thinks for a moment, what does it mean to marry you? Obviously, the ancient marriage system has already appeared in his mind. But for a moment, his mind is foggy, and he is sluggish for a long time before he nods stiffly. After nodding, his brain explodes. Wei Wei wants to marry him. Zero jumps up and stares at Wei Wei Bai nervously. He seems to think that she is just joking, although there is no marriage system. But if some people really decide not to mess around and want to be together one by one for a lifetime, then they will also hold some simple ceremonies similar to ancient weddings, to make sure that the other party will be their one and only. Wei Wei Bai sees that he is so nervous that his pupils are constricted. She doesn't know whether he is happy or not, but she is sure that he is scared. She calmly waves her hand, puts the cup of drink in his hand, and then says softly, "Then I will go to sleep first. Good night." After throwing a big bomb, she shakes the quilt as if nothing has happened, then closes her eyes and goes to sleep. Zero stands there holding the cup in a daze, then walks out step by step. After walking out, he quickly runs to the computer with the virtual light screen. He frantically searches for some things about the ancient wedding ceremony on it. A wedding is a notarial ceremony for two people to confirm their social relationship, and it is a powerful promise to form a family one by one. Marriage means that she is his. For a lifetime, it is just the two of them. Zero stares at the screen blankly, and then begins to unconsciously look at the wedding photos and wedding videos. The groom has to hold the bride's hand, and there's a ring and a bouquet. It seems that they need to invite others to witness the establishment of their relationship. Wei Wei Bai has a good sleep, and that Hua doesn't disturb her in her dreams. She's in good spirits. When she wakes up, she finds that Zero looks very haggard, sitting at the head of the bed with two panda eyes and looking at her. She doesn't know how long he has been looking at her. Zero sees that she has woken up and is stunned for a while. Suddenly, he kneels down on one knee and then holds a small deadwood ring in his hands. There's also a small bouquet of beautiful white flowers. Unlike the red roses, these small flowers were wild. One by one, the beautiful little flowers could glow at night, and even during the day, they emitted a beautiful silver light. When a young man was nervous, his beautiful lips were tight and his eyelashes drooped, not daring to look at her directly. He held the flower in the deadwood ring and said in a low voice, "I took this ring from the tree of life. There's a small flower seed on it, and it will bloom when the time comes." The small ring was a beautiful and strange dark brown with a small leaf that was full of life. In the middle of the leaf, there was a cute pocket-sized flower bud. The tree of life was the tree that grew near the monsters' nests and was regarded as a treasure by the monsters. This was also the tree with the most vitality and the longest life force in the apocalypse. There was fresh spring water near the trees, as well as all sorts of incredible plants. Because this tree had exuberant vitality, its branches and flowers could also make the wearer healthy. If it weren't for the monsters, many people would have gone there to steal the tree of life. That small flower was also a flower from the tree of life. Zero's ability allowed him to enter and exit the monster's lair as he pleased. Seeing that she seemed to be hesitating, Zero bent his fingers, as if he was worried that Wei Wei Bai would go back on her words. / button. Chapter 2162. Maybe it was just a joke. Even if it was a joke, he was happy. At least it proved that Wei Wei still wanted to live with him alone. Ling couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, a gentle kiss landed softly on his smile. Ling's eyes widened. His eyes were moist and shocked when he heard her voice. "Can you only put on?" Ling's fingers were trembling as he put the ring on her finger. The white finger and the withered tree ring looked good together. Wei Wei Bai took the flower and teased softly, "I'll find time to make you a ring too." Ling immediately took out another ring. "No need, look, I've done it." This was the same material as the withered tree ring. But he didn't dare to take it out at first, worried that it was a joke by Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai calmly took the ring and put on him. 2 rings of the same material were on 2 different ring fingers. Ling's fingers clenched and the ring was somewhat restrained, but he had never been so happy before. Ding! Siwa's favorability is at 95. Since he said he wanted to get married, Ling became a honey fairy. He smiled sweetly and foolishly every day, almost like a silly little bride. Wei Wei Bai looked at the man in front of her. He was sitting on a chair and seriously sewing the flower on the wedding dress. He really made the wedding dress by himself, needle by needle. On his beautiful fingers, those needles and threads seemed to have a soul. She sewed a cute little flower very evenly. Although Wei Wei Bai's expression was indifferent, seeing that the favorability had risen to 97, her eyes couldn't help but soften. 97. She looked at the rest of the personalities. Dewa 25. Pei, shameless old fogey. Irwa 25. Pei, stingy old demon. Sanhua 40. Chong. Pei, big eater. She can eat until she's poor. Wei Wei Bai found nothing good about the rest of the personalities and looked at Siwa's favorability. It was full with a swipe. This was the man of her dreams. Wei Wei Bai reached out to hold her chin. Suddenly, she frowned as a wave of uncontrollable nausea surged up. She got out of bed and rushed to the bathroom. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood? Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched the corner of her mouth. Her fingers were stained with blood. What the hell? The system immediately said, "There really are side effects?" Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm. What happened? The system flipped through the calculated data. At first, I wasn't sure because of the side effects of pregnancy. Although the rate of energy deprivation was fast, it was still within the health value. Today, your body started to have problems. The result of my calculations is that if you force yourself to give birth to air eggs after 10 months, your body may be finished. In fact, in the beginning, when the energy was being drained, it was very powerful. The system had already calculated in advance. There was a lot of incomplete information about this plane. Most of the time, he had to make his own deductions and calculations. This did not seem to have anything to do with the side quest. Instead, it was some other accident that caused the loss of information. Was it because he was carrying the red string? The system did not say. Instead, it continued. If you keep taking high-intensity supplements and with your body as a psychic, you may not die until you give birth to air eggs, but your body's health will be ruined. Normal people would not suffer like this. In 3 months, they would be drained of energy by 0 and collapse. However, Wei Wei Bai's physical condition in this plane was very good. Moreover, she was a psychic that was 1 in a million. Plus, she was taken care of meticulously during her pregnancy. Chapter 2163. It took almost 2 months for the terrible sequelae to show. It was already considered very good. Wei Wei Bai frowned and was about to say something when she saw Zero rushing in. He stared at the blood in the wash basin and then glanced at the blood on Wei Wei Bai's lips. His expression was gloomy and cold, and his blue eyes were gloomy like a storm. Zero immediately hugged her. "Let's go check." His tone was extremely nervous. His fingers were trembling, but his gloomy face forced a comforting smile. It seemed that he didn't want her to be more worried. The device malfunctioned as soon as it was checked. There were even signs of an explosion. Zero didn't dare to let Wei Wei Bai take the risk. After putting her back on the bed, he began to take out the primitive medical equipment and began to manually check her body. He warmed the cold heart listening device before putting it on her chest. Her heartbeat was abnormal. He recorded a lot of data seriously. Finally, he reached out and touched her stomach, listening to the active trembling inside. There was a trace of disbelief in Zero's blue eyes. He said softly, "Wei Wei, does it hurt a lot? Every time you get up or take a walk, your stomach hurts a lot, right?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him quietly for a while and finally nodded. Nonsense. She was holding an energy ball in her stomach. How could it not hurt? But this kind of pain was tolerable, and she knew that she would need to abort it after a while. So she didn't say much. A sad expression appeared on Zero's face. His fingers left her stomach. His heavy breathing made him look a little out of control. Zero said, "The mother is overexerting energy. You clearly said that it would be fine. How could it be so bad?" Wei Wei Bai looked down and said calmly, "Something happened to the child?" Zero's fingers clenched tightly. "He's fine, but might be harmful to you." Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to say in a low voice, "If you really can't give birth, then we—" Before she could finish her sentence, tears began to roll down her cheeks. Round teardrops dotted his long eyelashes, making him look indescribably miserable. He tried his best to roll up his sleeves and wipe his eyes. He nodded in a muffled voice. "Yes, since he's found to be harmful to you, I don't want him." As he spoke, more tears fell from his eyes. Their voices were muffled and choked. How pitiful. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to say anything more hurtful. He was worried that Zero would not be able to bear it and started to cry. Speaking of which, this guy was still an adorable egg a few months ago. In just a few short months, it was already a miracle that he could grow to this extent. Therefore, it was normal for him to be childish at times. The instruments in the laboratory began to explode. As long as Wei Wei Bai tried to do a body check, she would definitely fail. Zero touched the devices that were about to explode, and his pupils shrank. He seemed to know something, but he didn't say anything. He didn't want Wei Wei Bai to worry. Wei Wei Bai's vomiting of blood seemed to have subsided. It was just that the feeling of weakness in his body intensified. Sometimes he would sleep for 2 days. Every time he woke up, he would see Zero sitting by the bed and reaching out to check her pulse. It was as if he was checking for any abnormalities in her pulse and heartbeat. He would always smile at her. "It's okay. You've been in good condition recently." Wei Wei Bai would also smile. She didn't say anything that would make him more worried. The system was also strictly calculating Wei Wei Bai's physical condition. He had a small cloth on his head and was scribbling with a pen in his hand. There was no more information, so he checked and calculated by himself. Chapter 2164. He had now been reduced to a cave master. Ling restrained the strong uneasiness in his heart and held Wei Wei Bai's hand as they walked forward. The deadwood rings on their fingers had already bloomed into beautiful flowers. Ling opened the door and said to her, "Do you like it? If you don't like it, I'll change it." Bai Weiwei saw a pile of rags inside the door, as well as some discarded clothes placed on the table. In the middle of the table was a beautiful wedding dress. The white cloth was flowing with light, and beautiful flowers bloomed on the dress as if they were alive. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched it. The cloth was very good. It was definitely comfortable. If there was leftover cloth, she could make more pajamas. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reveal a satisfied smile. Her somewhat weak and tired eyes were filled with a bit of vitality. "It's very beautiful, I like it." Her approval made Ling's heart soften. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 98. For others, it would get harder and harder to farm, but for him, it was easy to farm from beginning to end. Wei Wei Bai looked at him even more gently. It was as if there were not only stars in his eyes, but more like the sun. Suddenly, she gritted her teeth and blood overflowed from her lips uncontrollably. Blood red fell on the white wedding dress. Wei Wei Bai frowned and covered her mouth, but the blood gushed out. Droplets of blood trickled out from between his fingers. She suddenly realized something and looked up to see Ling staring at her. His eyes revealed despair and gloominess that made her scalp numb. Even if Wei Wei Bai's emotions were blocked, she was frightened by Ling's eyes for a moment. Vomiting blood was not serious, It was just an initial energy backlash. The most serious thing would be in July or August, when the mother was devoured. At most, it was just a small fight. Ling's gloomy eyes only lasted for a moment before they exploded with worry. He pressed Wei Wei Bai to rest and then gave her all kinds of medicine, watching her eat, until Wei Wei Bai fell asleep because of the medicine. He sat in the room and his face turned cold. The violent eyes made people think that he had changed his personality. Zero's blue eyes were sharp and crazy. You said you were fine, but you lied to me. His blue eyes were suddenly dyed in gold. But in the next moment, the blue flames burned and forced the golden flames back. A pained expression appeared on Zero's face. I won't let you hurt her. The child will hurt her, right? He gnashed his teeth, nearly roaring at the top of his lungs. A cold and holy voice sounded in his ears. Come back. Zero's eyes went blank for a moment, but in the next second, it immediately turned into a violent struggle. I'm not going back. I don't want to go back. I want to stay by her side. Let me accompany her. She can't do without me now. Her body is like this now. Who in this world would protect her? He was the only one who knew how to do it. He resisted the call to come back. Ling staggered to the bedside and reached out to hold Wei Wei Bai's haggard and weak face. Why didn't he notice that there was something wrong with her body? Why didn't he realize that this child would kill her? Tears welled up in Zero's blue eyes. The violent struggle and pain turned into tears of grievance and self-blame. He didn't want to cry. How could a man cry when he wanted to protect his woman? But he couldn't help it. His fingers trembled as he carried Wei Wei Bai and rushed into the laboratory's medical room. This child couldn't stay. If he had to risk her life, he would rather not have a child. While crying, Zero resisted the corrosion of the main personality and began to set the data of the instrument. The instrument would lose control because of the main personality's power. He only needed to stop the main personality to use it. Zero's fingers were almost powerless. He gritted his teeth and trembled. The last step. There was only one step left. Zero's pale face was distorted because of the struggle, but his gaze towards Wei Wei Bai was gentle. He reached out and held her finger. The flower on the withered tree ring had already bloomed. It was a beautiful flower, small and pure. It was like the humble heart he held for her. Zero lowered his head and kissed her face. It was an incomparably pure kiss. He said in a low voice, I will protect you. His hair had already turned black, but the color of his eyes was still a determined and sweet sky blue. Ding! Fourth baby's favorability is at 99. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2165. Zero looked at the small shadow on the screen. It was a child, small and soft. He could barely see the child clearly. As long as he pressed the operation button on the device, the operation would begin to remove him. The removal process would only take 20 minutes. Zero's fingers trembled violently. The erosion of the primary personality was already affecting his body and his rationality. From time to time, he would tremble as he looked at Wei Wei by lying on the operating table. He treated her as his belief and reason to persevere in his most painful times. It's okay. He was almost hysterical as he bit his fingers in his mouth to ensure that the pain would not completely erode him. His mind was in a trance. Their love experience was actually disappearing bit by bit. This was the removal effect of the primary personality. From the beginning, the primary personality wanted to kill the owner of their chick complex. Because this was a weakness. Perhaps for the primary personality, this weakness was not a big one, but it was also intolerable. So the primary personality deliberately made her pregnant from the beginning. Was this also a conspiracy? Just as Zero was thinking this, he heard a deep sound in his ears. That was an accident. He denied it. But Zero's eyes were filled with fear. The sound was so close, it meant that he was almost completely eroded. He had to speed up. Zero's fingers pressed the button, but a yes/no option popped up on the screen. Damn it. He fiercely bit the fingers of his left hand. He bit them until they bled and hit the bone, but he started to feel no pain. He desperately controlled his right hand to press the yes button, but his vision started to turn black. Even if it was an accident, the primary personality still wanted to kill Wei Wei. The child would destroy her health in the future. Would the primary personality protect her? No, he would abandon her, take the child, and leave this place. He would leave his Wei Wei in this cruel apocalypse. Wei Wei Bai, without her health and superpowers, would not be able to survive in the apocalypse without anyone's protection. Not to mention, she might not be able to survive the birth and die. One of Zero's eyes was gold, the other blue. This meant that his consciousness was almost completely taken over by the primary personality. The blue color was his last bit of rationality. His blue eyes burst out with unimaginable love as he desperately pressed the yes button. The machine began to operate. Just as Zero was about to let out a sigh of relief, she found that her body was beginning to make cracking sounds. Blood oozed from his skin. The conflict between him and the main personality was too intense, and his body was starting to give out. But in the next second, he suddenly paused. Because there was a loud bang in the laboratory, darkness suddenly came, and the electricity was cut off. The primary personality cut off all the electricity. The surgery that was about to begin was also forced to stop. The primary personality chose to have the child instead of Wei Wei. The last glimmer of hope in Zero's eyes was snatched away by despair. He stumbled to the bedside and saw Wei Wei Bai in a deep sleep due to the drug. His fingers were full of blood as he searched for the ancient medical equipment. Because it was a laboratory, there were many kinds of medical equipment in the medical room. It included a complete set of scalpels that almost no one had ever used before, as well as a variety of manual tools. He did the surgery himself. He did it himself. Zero's expression was incomparably twisted. However, just as he was about to reach for the tool, he suddenly tightened his grip and slapped him hard. This was an insulting slap. It was also a slap to the face. He had crossed the line. As a subsidiary personality of the primary personality, he had no right to make decisions for the primary personality. /T. Chapter 2166. Zero's blue eye began to be dyed with gold. The powerful golden power devoured the last bit of blue in his eye bit by bit. A drop of tear appeared in his eye and slid down his delicate cheek that was stained with blood. It then flowed down his chin and fell on Wei Wei Bai's finger. He could no longer control his body. Zero was almost limp and fell down the bed. He used a twisted posture and reached out his finger to hook her hand that was hanging by the bed. The beautiful withered wood ring was dyed red by his blood. Zero was like a disabled robot that had lost power. His movements were uncoordinated. He shouted silently, "Wei Wei, I love you." She was the first person he saw when she entered the land of consciousness. He was the first person he talked to. He was the one who spent the most time with her. At first, he treated her like a child and was greedy for her gentleness and companionship. Later, it was an uncontrollable love. There was also the happiness and satisfaction of getting a response. The other personalities should be envious of him, because as the weakest personality, a lowly subpersonality, he got the most beautiful Wei Wei. Zero wanted to control his expression and show a beautiful smile, but it was very ugly. Because he could no longer control his expression, Zero gradually fell into a place of nothingness. He began to dissipate and was devoured by the main personality. What should I do if no one protects me? He suddenly struggled, but in the land of consciousness, he had always been the weakest. That's right. He suddenly remembered that a long time ago, the main personality had once said that they could infect each other. For example, although he was weak, he didn't have any practical abilities. But he could borrow the space power of the main personality, although only a little. It was enough for him to tear open space and go to the monster's nest to get the branches and flowers of the Tree of Life. Then, could he infect the other personalities with his love for Wei Wei? Even if only half of his love infected the other personalities, then That personality would definitely protect Wei Wei, because he loved her more than anyone else. He had shared his love with many people, so there was still a lot left. In the white land of consciousness, the eye-catching blue suddenly shattered. The golden threads began to devour the energy from the subpersonality. The other two personalities were also infected by the blue shards. Suddenly, all the personalities seemed to realize something. But it was too late. The shattered blue fragments were more offensive than ever. The blue infectious energy was even scarier than a virus, and it dug deep into his consciousness. All the personalities were infected, and no one could escape. The golden personality seemed to want to get rid of the external influence. However, there was a kind of soul-stirring throbbing that made his heart beat violently. This beat was full of joy, satisfaction, and happiness. However, it was more of a desire to protect. The protective instincts in the nestling complex rose crazily. No one could escape this kind of infection. The blue personality used all of its strength to spread its love to the other person. The last trace of blue entered the primary personality. There were only 3 personalities left in his body. Ding! Fourth baby's favorability is at 100. Ding! Fourth baby's personality has disappeared and cannot be restored. As for the finger that he hooked around Wei Wei, the flower on the tree of life's ring withered and the ring shattered. The tree of life only acknowledged the request of one consciousness. When you deeply loved a person, the tree of life would depend on the love of that soul to survive. // To make it easier to read next time, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like. Chapter 2167. The ring relied on this love to exist forever. If it lost the love of that soul, the ring would also die. The ring on Wei Wei Bai's finger also shattered because of the disappearance of his personality, including his pure love. The system could not see the bitter war in the personality. It saw fourth baby being swallowed by eldest baby. The mission to get rid of the child failed. Then, fourth baby died. However, the mission automatically jumped to 1/4 of the way. The mission jumped to 1/4? The system stared at the mission bar. What the hell, this mode? Side mission? Before the system could understand the strange part, it saw the lying zero's fingers move. The white fingertips, set off by the blood red, had a shallow sense of magnificence. The half-lying youth's eyelashes trembled a few times, and he gently opened his deep eyes. The exquisite light in his eyes, the gold shattered, and the blue light spread. He moved his thin lips, which were also stained with blood, somewhat evil and cold. Suddenly, he blinked his eyes. His breathing was sometimes light and sometimes heavy. He seemed to be struggling with something. But those blue light spots took the opportunity to successfully invade. The blue light spots scattered, but were not removed. Zero's fingers touched something. It was Wei Wei Bai's hand. He looked up. There were no more blue spots in his golden eyes, but it was no longer the usual holy and cold. Instead, there was a trace of humanity. He looked at her blankly, and his fingers could not help but hold her pale fingers. The next second, a strange feeling appeared in his calm eyes. His heartbeat suddenly accelerated. The feelings that did not belong to him, but belonged to him, exploded. Ding! Eldest baby's favorability is at 65. Ding! Second baby's favorability is at 60. Ding! Third baby's favorability is at 80. Love filled with the desire to protect. Love that was crazy and hysterical. Using his life to break the infected feelings. It completely eroded Zero's consciousness. He could not get rid of it, cannot get rid of it. He could only watch as he was infected, baptized by this crazy love. This weakest personality had actually succeeded in doing the most terrifying thing. Especially the main personality, it was attacked the most thoroughly. Even the main personality, who insisted on defending, was completely drowned by the huge and turbulent feelings. The bond of the fledgling complex made it impossible for anyone to escape this terrible infection. The system was speechless as it watched the favorability soar in front of it, It felt like its eyes were blurred. In the end, it thought for a long time and sighed. Fourth baby's love for her had been shared with many people, so there was still a lot left. He was divided into many personalities. Before the heroic destruction, he was still 100. Zero slowly stood up, her black hair draped over her back like a huge shadow. His thick and long eyelashes with slightly drooping eyelashes, his cold golden eyes gloomy. Zero looked at the sleeping Bai Weiwei. He stretched out his slender fingers, gently clasped her chin, and stared at her with a strange gaze. Without electricity, the medical room was a little dark. He was like a king in the darkness, but he was more like a lifeless demon as he gently bowed. He seemed to be confirming something, and looked for a long zay. Finally, his eyes, too. His strong desire to protect was distorted by his dark heart. It was an endless plunder and possession. And control was the main personality's strongest trait. The more you cared about something, the more you had feelings for that person. The more you couldn't bear the feeling of separation. / For the convenience of the next reading, you can click on the Chapter 2168. Not everyone's love would not hurt and would only silently protect. Zero was silent, his eyes half closed. His thin lips whispered to her in her sleep. It's a pity that the angel is no longer here. The personality that would not hurt her was no longer here. The rest, love was not a good thing. It would attract the greedy, covetous eyes of the devil. The personality that infected him, thinking that love could protect her. Just the hungry personality in his body. The more he loved a person, the more destructive it would be. Zero calmly let go of her chin, then raised his hand and waved elegantly, as if he was a commander. With a click, the electricity was restored. Then he bent down and carried Weiwei by. His movements were unusually gentle. Halfway through, his movements seemed to be a little stiff. This kind of strength was really something that could only be controlled after many rounds of training. Even the strength to carry her had to be specially trained. Was he sure that it was the most comfortable for her? There was a slight fluctuation in Zero's calm eyes. Then he calmly turned around and walked out. Weiwei had a bad sleep. It felt like she had been carrying bricks for 3 days and 3 nights. Her limbs were exhausted and howling. Just as she was about to open her eyes, she heard the system say, softly, 2 pieces of good news, 1 piece of bad news. Weiwei was alert. She did not open her eyes. What news? The system said carefully, do you want the bad news or the good news? Weiwei hesitated for a moment. Whatever. There were at least 2 pieces of good news. The system said, the 2 pieces of good news are that fourth baby's favorability is 100. Weiwei said, the good news is expected. Fourth baby is my little angel. It will definitely be 100. The system said, the second piece of good news is that the favorability of first baby, second baby, and third baby has increased. Weiwei did not have much hope. How much? 3 to 5 points. The system reported the number. Weiwei was silent for a long time. This high favorability was a little frightening. No, it was like giving it away for free. Of course, the favorability was worth being happy about. She was about to let out a big smile. The system said, the bad news is that fourth baby is dead. Weiwei a bolt from the blue. He was struck by lightning. He died on the spot. Her 4th child. This piece of bad news was worth 10,000 pieces of good news. The 4th baby, who would cook for her, make a drink for pregnant women, wash her feet, put toothpaste on her toothbrush, wear her shoes, and praise her beauty every day, was dead. Weiwei almost turned over and sat up, but a burst of pain in her stomach made her fall back down. A hand reached out from the side and firmly supported her back, not waiting for her to fall on the bed. She was already surrounded by a warm embrace. Weiwei gasped softly and rubbed her face against his chest. It was a familiar scent. She glanced sideways and saw the youth hugging her. That familiar and delicate face had an indifferent and calm expression. There was not a trace of warmth in his golden eyes, as if they were an endless wasteland. Weiwei glared at him for a while before pushing him away. His movements were extremely vigilant. Seeing the deep panic in her eyes, Zero couldn't help but reach out to comfort her. But he controlled this impulse. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything and even looked at him silently. Because her body had not recovered yet, Zero was very calm and naturally took over some of the work of the dissipated personality. For example, when he automatically made the drink for pregnant women, the taste of the drink was exactly the same. He lowered his eyes and stared at the drink for a long time before passing it to Wei Wei Bai. /T. Chapter 2169. Wei Wei Bai did not argue and drank as she should. Then, Ling went to prepare the meal. He did not reject it at all. His eyes were indifferent, but his actions were not vague. All his actions and food were exactly the same. Wei Wei Bai also ate calmly. When she vomited at night, Ling took out the antiemetic medicine that he had prepared and mixed it with the sour fruit juice milk for her to drink. They were all the same as the weakest personality and the same steps and habits. Wei Wei Bai's relaxed brows made him smile uncontrollably. But this smile was quickly suppressed by Ling, and his eyes were even colder. Ling even carried her to bed and covered her with a blanket. All his actions were the same rhythm and appearance. If his face was not so smelly, the color of his eyes and hair would have changed. Wei Wei Bai thought it was Siwa. After everything was done, Ling calmly stretched out his finger and gently waved it in the air. The light dimmed a lot. It was comfortable and not glaring, suitable for sleeping. Good night, Wei Wei. His magnetic and perfect voice had a comforting gentleness. Unfortunately, there was no emotional fluctuation, and it was more like a routine greeting. Then, Ling curled his fingers, and a book appeared on his lap out of thin air. He crossed his legs, supported his chin with one hand, and looked down at the book. He seemed to be a professional caretaker. After everything was done, there was nothing for him to do. Wei Wei Bai also waited quietly. The two of them seemed to be in a stalemate. The originally cozy room was pulled apart by an incomparably tense silence. Ling flipped through the book unhurriedly. What do you want to ask? It's better for pregnant women to sleep early. Wei Wei Bai was silent and did not say anything. She just stared at him warily. Ling's golden eyes darkened, and his voice was extremely calm. Are you waiting for him to appear? Waiting for me to disappear? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and did not refute. Ling suddenly sneered, which was completely unlike his cold character. His voice was still calm. He won't appear. Ling closed the book as if he was the Grim Reaper. Forever. These two words were a little too heavy. Zero was aware of his own emotions. He was actually jealous. Jealousy? It was an extremely strange emotion. He coldly suppressed his surging and unfamiliar emotions. He threw the book in his hand out, and the book that disappeared into thin air reappeared on the bookshelf. Then, he hooked another book. The amount of knowledge in this book was too small, and it was not enough for him to flip through a few pages. Suddenly, he realized something, and his fingers paused in the middle of flipping through the pages. He heard a sobbing sound that couldn't be hidden in time. Ling glanced over and saw that Wei Wei Bai's eyes were red and tears were flowing uncontrollably. She didn't seem to want him to see her pathetic state. She immediately used the blanket to wipe away her tears, and then suppressed the sudden sadness. Don't say that. I don't believe you. She really didn't believe it. Wei Wei Bai wiped her tears and sneered. You hit him, didn't you? Ling Jujio flipped through the pages of the book, confronting Wei Wei Bai's cold and sharp gaze. In her beautiful eyes, there was a hint of madness and intense emotions. He seemed to have said that the personality was dead. She was also sad to death. Ling Jujio's eyelashes were half closed, and he was silent for a while before he said casually, If you say so. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai seemed to be relieved. She narrowed her eyes and whispered softly, I knew it was fine. I was waiting for you to come back. Zero maintained this action for a long time, until the sound of her steady breathing sounded softly, and his fingers finally turned a page of the book. After a while, he got up gracefully and pulled out a clean blanket. His fingers flicked the blanket on Wei Wei Bai's body. The blanket that Wei Wei Bai used to wipe her tears disappeared. He lowered his head and gently covered her with a new blanket. Under the dim light, his golden eyes seemed to flash with an irrepressible gentleness. But soon it was suppressed again. as if it had never existed. At https://www.sashu.com/ full text at https://www.sashu.com// download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 2170. Wei Wei Bai and the system studied the possibility of the 108 personalities returning. She found that fourth baby was completely dissolved. Even if she wanted to find fourth baby, she could only look for it from the other three personalities. For example, the life skills that eldest baby showed now were fourth babies. After all, he did the same housework as fourth baby, and the food he made tasted the same as fourth baby. Every time she ate the same thing, she would look at eldest baby's constipated face. She couldn't help but look at her finger. The ring on it was gone. So fourth baby was gone too. Fourth baby, who had a favorability of 100 points, was cute to her. This caused Wei Wei Bai's face to be darker than black hair zeros when she looked at him. Her fourth baby was like a spring breeze to her and would coax her to eat. That was like the robot in front of her. So Wei Wei Bai threw away her chopsticks. "I'm not eating." Zero looked at her indifferently and reminded her rationally, "It's not good for your body if you don't eat." Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and sneered. "My appetite is bad when I see you, and my body is even worse." This was a clear indication. What she wanted was the dissipated personality to appear. Zero's expression didn't change, and even his expression was unusually calm. Wei Wei Bai's tantrum seemed to be just a child's tantrum to him. He glanced at the food, and his voice was gentle. "You don't like the taste?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly, sneered, and didn't say anything. But it was obvious that she was disobedient and didn't want to eat. Zero looked at her indifferently for a while, then leaned forward, reached for a clean spoon, and scooped up half a spoonful of sweet porridge. His movements were precise and gentle, and he brought the spoon to her mouth. "Come, I'll feed you." Although he tried his best to be gentle, that indifferent and cold expression didn't change at all. This attitude was like a master feeding a pet. Although there was a trace of sincere pity, his attitude was still particularly high and mighty. This kind of arrogance was hard to change, even if he wanted to. This was something that Siwa would do. Not to mention feeding her, Siwa couldn't wait to wash her face and feet. As for the misophobic Dawa, he felt that he was condescending to feed her a meal. His chin was gently raised, and he looked at her with his nostrils. Wei Wei Bai moved her body and swept a plate of fresh and delicious food in front of Zero. She stood up. Her face was pale, and her body was much thinner. "If you want to eat, eat by yourself. I don't have time to play house with you." The arrogance and fierceness in her eyes did not diminish in the slightest. The weakness of her body made her even sharper towards others. Wei Wei Bai struggled to reach for the white coat, intending to go to the laboratory. After all, the monster horde would come again this week. In the future, there would be more and more of these monsters. 3 or 4 months later, the Monster King ate its fill and fell into a deep sleep. Only then would the monsters rest and hunt at their usual pace. It wouldn't be a suicide attack like this one. He had to destroy a few bases. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's tired face, she frowned and buttoned up her clothes. She then tied up her long hair with a leather band. Her movements were neat. She didn't have the lazy and dependent appearance of her previous personality. She was now back to her previous self, cold and heartless. She didn't accept other people's kindness. She was even annoyed by other people's special care. Other people. Zero sat on the chair. The half-spoonful of sweet porridge was cold. His fingers slowly retracted. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2171. Then he looked up at Wei Wei Bai's back as she walked out without hesitation. Slowly, he put the sweet porridge in his mouth. Although the taste was cold, it was still the same taste. He didn't put in any wrong seasonings, nor did he make any mistake with the heat. Why didn't she eat it? The morning sickness had also begun to subside. The child was pressed down by him and didn't torment her much. Being with him must be much more comfortable than being with that personality. There was a strange puzzlement in Zero's deep eyes. There was even a sense of loss. Although his sitting posture was still so straight and his movements were so reserved. Wei Wei Bai went out and breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at Dewa's face made her want to beat him up. She felt that compared to Siwa, it was the difference between 1 yuan and 10 million. People couldn't be compared to people, and personalities couldn't be compared to personalities. Why didn't the other 3 brats dissolve it? It wasn't easy to eat a small piece of sweet biscuit, but she had to endure 3 rat feces. It was fine if she endured it, but the 3 rat feces ate her sweet biscuit in turn. Her sweet biscuit was eaten by the other personalities when she didn't know. Even if her feelings were blocked, Wei Wei Bai still felt that she had lost 100 million. Wei Wei Bai walked into the laboratory. When the others saw Wei Wei Bai, they immediately bowed their heads respectfully and greeted her. During this period of time, Wei Wei Bai didn't come often, but Zero would often come around. Everyone was kept in check until they didn't dare to say a word. They also had more expectations for the future of the base. Because of Zero's strength, they all saw the hope of survival in the end of the world. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She took the folder with a bad expression, opened the pen, and began to record the more important experimental data. 1, 3, 5 ran over and said respectfully, "Doctor, there's a relatively large experiment recently that needs your signature." Wei Wei Bai frowned and said impatiently, "What experiment?" 1, 3, 5. It's the creation of psychics. Zero's success proves that our direction is right. We can repeatedly create other psychics so that our base can be in an invincible position. Apocalyptic resources were scarce. To survive, humans built countless bases in the beginning. So many years had passed since the apocalypse. There were a lot fewer bases. The main reason was that they did not starve to death due to lack of resources or were eaten by monsters. Instead, it was humans killing each other to expand his territory and obtain more resources. Some bases would begin to attack other weaker bases. After so many years, countless bases had died at the hands of their own people. At this thought, Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. After all, Zero's uniqueness was very difficult to replicate. After going through so many planes, Wei Wei Bai knew the uniqueness of the target. He was a proud son of heaven. This was how she felt, even if the targets in the plane were very miserable at first. But whether it was appearance, IQ, or anything else, he was definitely not an ordinary person. As a person who cared a lot about appearances and was a picky person, how was it possible for Wei Wei Bai to bite down on every single one of the targets? However, she was always able to do so without any hindrance. This proved that all the targets met her standards. Wei Wei Bai sighed and suddenly realized something. She looked up. She saw Zero standing on the 2nd floor. He had one hand on the handrail of the stairs, and his slender figure stood quietly on it. He was strong and calm. It was as if he was a god looking down at ants. His gaze was fixed on Wei Wei Bai, and he finally looked a little more human. /T. Chapter 2172. Although she was still high and mighty, there was no lack of holy coldness. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were not very good. Her impatience was even more obvious as she looked at him sarcastically. Then she said to 1335, "Give me the experiment data, and then tell everyone to carry out another experiment first. Create the body of psychic, but without consciousness." This was the complete opposite of Zero. Zero had too much consciousness. Wei Wei Bai emphasized, "Create that body with Zero's standards. Remember that the hair is blonde, the eyes are blue, and the kind that is very good-looking." 1335 was confused, but she still nodded. After Wei Wei Bai gave the order, she couldn't help but yawn. She was still in a sleepy state. She threw the folder to the assistant and said, "I'm going to rest first. Look for me if there's any progress or difficulties." 1335 nodded immediately. Then Wei Bai walked up the stairs expressionlessly. Zero's fingers were still on the handrail. He looked down at her, his golden eyes a little more emotional. You want him? That disappeared personality. Wei Bai stopped halfway and looked up at him. She suddenly smiled. Let's make a deal. Anyway, you must be very troubled because of your split consciousness. Can you give me my Zero? I'll make a body for him. This way, you have one less consciousness to disturb you, and I can be with him. Isn't that good? The experiment just now was to accommodate the existence of fourth baby's consciousness. Wei Bai nodded. She unconsciously touched her ring finger. The ring on it was gone. She couldn't help but touch it. Yes, he is my husband. Her voice was low, but it was soft and affectionate. Even her expression was so beautiful. It was as if mentioning that personality was the happiest thing in the world. Zero's gaze fell on her finger, and then back to her face again. His lips tightened slightly, and even the light in his eyes began to change a little. They became deep and dangerous. You like him that much? Wei Bai paused, as if she didn't think he would ask such a ridiculous question. But she couldn't help but laugh and say, Isn't that nonsense? Who doesn't like him? He's so perfect and cute. Zero noticed the incredulous doubt in her eyes. It was as if she felt that everyone should like the dissipated personality. But that was clearly his weakest personality. It was a consciousness that he could easily clean up. Under Wei Bai's puzzled gaze, Zero raised his chin slightly, looking cold and arrogant. I don't like it, Wei Bai said. It's none of my business whether you like it or not. Are you going to make this deal or not? I have some locations of life sources. I can give you a map in exchange, but you have to get it yourself. Only someone like Zero, who had a cheat level, could go to these life sources. His expression turned even colder. He even felt that her ignorant yet hopeful face was so glaring. Wei Bai tried to increase the price. There's still some life sources underground. I can give you the password. By the way, do you like others? I can find one for you. Zero's cold golden eyes seemed to contain an endless dark abyss. His voice suddenly lowered, cold and ominous. He won't appear again. Wei Bai's businesslike smile froze, and a trace of panic flashed in her eyes. But she quickly suppressed it with a deep breath, calmly went upstairs, and brushed past Zero. Her shoulder was even close to his arm. The soft touch brushed past like a feather. // Chapter 2173. Her aura was seductive. However, her words were so certain that it was jarring to the ears. He will definitely appear because he loves me. After saying that, she raised her chin like him. She looked down on everyone. He didn't look back and let her leave with arrogant steps like a proud little peacock. After a moment of silence, Ling lowered his head and looked at his hands. Where his fingers were holding the armrest was already broken. Zero's prideful neck finally lowered slightly. A large shadow covered his eyes. It made his cold face look a little gloomy. The infection is so serious. He muttered to himself in a low voice, and his heart beat faster. When she brushed past him, he felt satisfied and impulsive. He even wanted more. It seemed that suppressing this love couldn't be dispelled. Ling took a few steps back, let go of the broken armrest, and then followed her. Time was up. It was her lunchtime. The feelings that were infected by that personality were simply impossible to resist. When Ling finished preparing lunch, he saw Wei Bai holding a can of nutrition, looking at the experimental data expressionlessly, and then eating it. The can wasn't delicious. It didn't even have any taste or texture. Wei Bai wasn't picky either. After eating, she looked back and saw the fresh food on the table. She threw the can into the trash can beside her. Don't bother. You're not him. Why are you pretending? Bai Wei looked at him with disdain. Okay, I'm going to the laboratory. After saying that, she blew away like the wind. She didn't even look at him. Even the food he cooked was disliked by her. Ling stood by the dining table and followed her away. He didn't stop her. His eyes were cold, like the moonlight under broken ice. There was a secret depression. He was suppressing an explosive emotion. Zero sat down and began to eat the food she had cooked unhurriedly. It was clearly the same thing. Why didn't she eat it? Ling lowered his eyes and thought coldly. Suddenly, he muttered to himself, "How do I make her eat normally?" His cold and arrogant face suddenly changed its expression. This was a bewitching charm. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, revealing a trace of beauty. He muttered to himself in a low voice, his tone lazy. "Let me do it. I'll do something that will make her very tired and very comfortable. After she has no strength to resist, I'll force feed her." But in the next second, his expression changed again. He bared his teeth and was incomparably irritable. "Shut up. She is a child. Don't even think of touching her. Let me go out, I'll hunt. I'll take back all the best things and she'll be happy." "No," the grumpy personality suddenly said. "The child shouldn't exist. It will hurt her. Let's kill it first." Zero suddenly frowned. "Let's go back." Silence ensued. Zero returned to his usual cold and noble appearance. He took out a clean tissue to wipe his mouth and was about to get up with one hand on the table. However, he found that his strength had crushed the table. Zero glanced at the table and said in a low voice, "I find that I'm a little angry." He wasn't the only one whose emotions were fluctuating. The other two personalities were also restless and tried their best to come out. Why did they come out? They just had the same goal, to get her. However, the infectious desire to protect her still existed, and the emotions of not wanting to hurt her were equally intense. Chapter 2174. Zero walked out and followed her. Just like the weakest personality, he kept following her. But that personality could pull the corner of her clothes. And although he had this impulse, he absolutely couldn't do it. It was more like she was pulling the corner of his clothes. When Zero walked to the door of the laboratory, he heard Wei Wei say to the assistant, "Is the model out?" "Assistant, yes. First use the secondary materials to assemble an appearance model and soak it in the nutrient solution. Once the appearance is confirmed, start to collect the main materials to cultivate the experimental body." Wei Wei Bai's voice became happy. "Really? Hurry up, take me to see it." Her words were mixed with uncontrollable laughter. She was almost as happy as a little girl. Zero paused at the door for a few seconds before slowly walking in. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai's back facing him. In front of her was a circular glass tank. Inside was a body without any sign of life. The thin figure was slender and good-looking, and the long blonde hair fluttered in the transparent nutrient solution. The half-closed eyes, without any sign of life, were blue and delicate and pure. It was only 70 to 80% similar to his appearance, but it was softer. When Wei Wei Bai saw this body, her eyes softened. She slowly walked to the glass tank. She quietly reached out and hugged the outer layer of the glass tank. Her face was close to the glass, and her eyebrows were curved. She revealed a very sweet smile. It was as if she was hugging her missing lover. Zero was standing a few meters away. His gentle but arrogant expression had disappeared, and his eyes were terrifyingly cold. The sweeter her smile, the more gloomy his eyes were. It was like the oppressive silence before a storm, before a violent disaster. Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel the resentful gaze behind her. She couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with Dewa?" Dewa had been copying Siwa's cooking skills these days, and the food was delicious. But when she ate, she thought of her sweet biscuit. When she saw Dewa's cold face, she couldn't help but want to compare. When she compared, she found that there was no comparison. She didn't want to eat. Therefore, one must never have the opportunity to compare. In the past, the targets she used to attack every day were all perverts and crazy people. Every day, they would turn around and become evil targets. After a while, he got used to it. If she had started out with Dewa, she would have just treated him a little better according to her usual practice and gotten some favorability points. But this plane had given her fourth baby. Why did he give her the other 3 perverts? How could he be in a good mood after such comparison? Compared to Sweet Biscuit and Little Angel, all of the previous targets were trash. The only reason she wasn't trash was because her strategy had succeeded and her favorability had increased. Which strategy target was as sweet as Siwa from beginning to end? People who were used to eating sweets had to face Da Wa's bitter face. Wei Wei Bai wanted to go on strike. The system replied, "He's staring at you. After all, his favorability level is over 65, so he's considered in love. If you don't look at him, he won't be happy." It was this personality that was unusually reserved and patient. It could be said to be coldly rational. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get along with her in such an old-fashioned manner. He didn't even think about the host's behavior these past few days, which was blatant disdain. Which man in love could stand it? Wei Wei Bai rubbed against the glass. "I'll take a few more days to calm down. After all, 3 years of strategy is so long, it's okay to be lazy." Moreover, he immediately expressed favorability to the other personalities. This was too obvious. It was not beneficial for the follow-up strategy. The system said, "Dewa is coming. He's coming like a ghost." Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows twitched, and a huge force suddenly held her in an embrace. Before she could struggle, Zero's cold and deep voice came in her ears. As if it came from the abyss of hell, each word was soft but dangerous. "I'm angry." It was such a simple and calm sentence. Suddenly, a huge force began to shatter the ground, and a violent wave shattered the nearby glass troughs. The newly formed model that simulated fourth baby's appearance. In the shattered glass troughs, it was torn apart by the crazy force. There were pieces of flesh and blood, shattered glass everywhere, exposed wires, and screaming people running in all directions. The scene was extremely chaotic. Bai Weiwei stared blankly for a moment before turning around. She saw Ling's cold and arrogant eyes staring at her with a sharp gaze, like a demon hibernating in the darkness, suddenly revealing his true colors, waiting to devour her. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m/sashu.com//Tikama. Chapter 2175. This gaze was accompanied by a doomsday-like scene. It was especially lethal. It seemed that in the next second, she would become a piece of flesh in the broken glass trough. And when Zero killed the model, did he not have any doubts in his heart? That body was 70 to 80% similar to his. Wei Wei Bai was like a small rabbit being stared at by a large beast. Her body was stiff. Zero's cold eyes were filled with hostility. His black hair fluttered gently under the influence of the energy waves. He looked at the lump of flesh. With a flick of his finger, the flesh exploded into bloody foam. In the end, it all disappeared into the space crack. The model had completely disappeared, but he did not look happy. Like a demon king, he stared at her with an unusually oppressive gaze. It was as if he was considering whether to turn her into a bloody foam and throw her into the space to disappear forever. Wei Wei Bai felt a chill down her spine. All kinds of electrical appliances and wires kept exploding. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai could not help but choke and cough. The air was filled with pungent burning gas. She really could not help it. Otherwise, she would be like a quail. With Zero's behavior, he was going to create a massacre in the next second. She did not dare to cough too loudly. She held back her tears. She covered her mouth with her hand and trembled violently. It was not a matter of fear, but she choked and wanted to drink water. The person holding her seemed to be stunned for half a second. Then, he suddenly carried her and walked out. All kinds of electrical appliances behind them stopped rebelling. Zero snapped his fingers and the glass shards rolled up. The broken things also lost power. The rest of the good equipment automatically operated. The robots were also notified and quickly came to repair and clean up. With just a snap of his fingers, all the follow-up work was arranged. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and coughed uncomfortably. A hand suddenly pressed on her forehead. It was a warm feeling. She looked at him with reddened eyes and saw him pass a glass of milk to her. Wei Wei Bai actually wanted to drink water, but milk was not bad. Her throat was too itchy. She took it and sipped it, worried that she would choke again if she drank too much. When she took it, the ruthlessness in the Zero's eyes finally dissipated a little. Wei Bai finished the milk, but the cup suddenly disappeared. She looked at Zero and found that the cup was in his hand. His cold and indifferent eyes stared at her. Her beautiful fingers were holding the transparent glass, and there were still some remnants of milk on it. He looked at her for a while, then turned around calmly and went to wash the cups. Wei Bai, it was truly a moment of confusion. Only then did the system dare to speak. I think he was considering killing you just now. That murderous aura was exploding out. Since he was forcefully infected, there was no room for him to increase his favorable impression points. This would cause the target's emotions to become unstable, or even repelled it. That was why the target was so terrifying. Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and said calmly, "Not necessarily. Why do I feel like he's jealous?" If he was really considering killing her. When the glass trough exploded, it was impossible that there wasn't a single shard of glass on her body. When Zero was angry, he obviously didn't think about the child. In his cold eyes, there was only one emotion that was directed at her. She was still able to discern this. Wei Bai rubbed her temples. "Seriously, isn't it enough if I don't die from exhaustion in this plane? Such a dangerous guy. Who let him out? If it wasn't for the life points on Yi Xuan." Chapter 2176. She looked at the reward of dozens of days of life points and was not moved at all. In fact, she was disgusted with it. Wei Bai still did not have a good strategy for Dao's personality. This ability value was too off the charts. She was afraid that he would get angry one day and suddenly blow her up into pieces, because he could run amok in this plane. In the end, she met such a cheat character. She wished she was still a little white flower. After all, if she was a little white flower, she would be crying and begging for hugs by now. Really, if she had known, she would have strangled him to death in his egg. Zero finished washing the cup and forced himself to be rational. He coldly examined the sudden outburst in his heart. Jealousy, anger, and inexplicable other irritable emotions that could not be distinguished at all. That was why it had accumulated to this state. In his personality, he was the one in control. Reason was always on the emotional side. He would never let himself make a useless decision. But the thing that was destroyed just now made him realize clearly. The dark desire to destroy in his heart could actually control him. It made him completely explode. He still maintained a cold expression and wiped his fingers clean. Then he slowly walked out. He saw the girl who made him unstable curled up on the sofa. The little robot next to her was wiping the floor. She looked at him expressionlessly. Her hair was a little messy because of just now. A few strands of long hair fell on her cheeks. Her lips were pale and fragile. Her dazed look was completely different from her previous tit-for-tat attitude, but it seemed unusually lonely and cold. Zero did not go over. Instead, he stood for a while and just looked at her quietly. Those irritable emotions seemed to have been appeased a little. Wei Bai did not seem to notice him. There was a hint of sadness in her fragile eyes. This sadness was like a physical attack. It made Zero frown slightly. Bai Weiwei's face was dejected. "Is that the wall monitor? He stares at me every day." The system said, "He's still staring at you now." Wei Bai said, "Then I'll pose for a while more. He won't even give me a few seconds to relax." She continued to chat with the system. Suddenly, a pair of hands gently lifted her up. Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, but she saw that Zero's expression was less dark and ruthless. Instead, he felt a sense of helplessness, although he restrained himself very well. However, his drooping eyes softened a little. He pursed his lips lightly as if he was organizing his words. In the end, he slowly walked forward. The space was torn apart, and the power of thunder inside distorted everything. But he didn't feel anything. He carried Wei Bai as if he was walking on a quiet path and disappeared. The berserk space was like a tamed child in front of Zero. In a burst of silent, distorted light, Wei Bai suddenly smelled a fragrance. The fragrance of flowers, the sound of flowing water, and the panting of wild beasts. There were also the cries of winged birds. They were standing on a tree that extended into a small forest. Zero picked a large tree and placed her on the trunk. Wei Wei Bai sat with her legs straight. Behind her was the main pole, surrounded by countless branches and leaves. This was the tree of life. Countless small flowers bloomed around her and above her head. The specks of light were too beautiful to behold. Zero sat directly beside her, one foot casually placed under the branch, and his black hair fell among the white flowers. At this moment, he was like a spirit among the flowers. He was so exquisite that he didn't seem human. This place is good for your health. I will carry you here every day in the future. // Chapter 2177. She was pregnant and her body was burdened. He calculated that giving birth wouldn't kill her. As long as she came here every day to nourish her energy, she could even recover her abilities after giving birth. The tree of life was a treasure for every human's ability to recover. It was just that there were too many monsters, so humans couldn't come here at all. Except he was an exception. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything, but looked at him with wide eyes. There were a few flowers between them. He saw a few small flowers fall on her hair. Her pale and haggard face had a few soft shadows. Very beautiful. This was the first time Zero really experienced the impact of beauty. It was as if he was suddenly excited, and the color of his eyes deepened. Ding, Dewa's favorability is at 68. Wei Wei Bai was deeply depressed. What was the reason for this group of psychopaths to increase their favorability? There was no trace at all. How was it like her little sun cake, which increased because she said she liked it? When Dewa's favorability increased, she was worried that he would suddenly become angry and want to kill her. Zero opened his eyes, stretched out his hand, and broke a branch as thick as a wrist. Then he began to carefully choose the branch with the strongest vitality. Finally, he picked the softest and most beautiful branch. He used his ability to turn the branch into a ring. The flower in the middle of the ring bloomed. Then he stretched out his arm and held Wei Wei Bai's soft fingers. He was about to lower his head and put it on her. Wei Wei Bai's fingers clenched tightly. She said, "Except for that, Zero, I won't accept anything else." Zero's movements paused. His cold eyes flashed with a few traces of embarrassment. After a moment of silence, he suddenly let go of her hand, his movements distant and arrogant. "Do you know why your ring disappeared?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him with some vigilance, but didn't respond. In the flowers, the youth's cold face looked so beautiful and ruthless. His voice was indifferent and calm. "You should know that the tree of life's ring is maintained by the power of consciousness. As long as there is a small trace of power, the ring can be maintained." The ring in his hand slowly bent and turned back into a branch. "Look, after I inject my own power into it, as long as this consciousness of mine doesn't die, it will always exist." What he didn't say was that it had to be done with love. Wei Wei Bai suddenly interrupted him. "That's enough." Zero's eyebrows twitched slightly, and a sinister sneer appeared in his voice. "You know it too." Wei Wei Bai had a frightened expression on her face. "I don't know." The denial was desperate and tragic. She seemed to have noticed the tears at the corner of her eyes and hurriedly wiped them away. Then she kept repeating, "You're lying, you're lying." Zero threw away the branch unhurriedly, and the look in his eyes became colder and more evil. It was like a demon in a flower of shadows. He slowly approached Wei Wei Bai like a terrifying poisonous snake. His fingers, which were more beautiful than flowers, gently fell on the corner of her eyes. He wiped away a tear. He unhurriedly grabbed her struggling fingers and even had the leisure to be careful not to use too much strength. He was worried about breaking her fingers, although he did have the thought of ruining her when he was jealous just now. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled, and she looked at him helplessly. His drooping black hair covered half of Zero's eyes, leaving only a few traces of cold golden light. He smiled, and his thin red lips seemed to be stained with blood. "You should forget about him." His voice was bewitching, although the tone was still cold. His fingers had already begun to touch her. / button. Chapter 2178. Soft, fragrant, the first person he saw. Under his strong rationality, there was still a remnant of the reliance on the fledgling complex. Then, there was the terrible love that was forcibly infected. After the desire to protect passed, there was an incomparably dark desire to possess. He wanted to touch her, and he wanted her to hug him. This was simply an instinctive temptation. As long as she looked at him, his heart couldn't help but beat faster, and his blood boiled. In fact, they even resented that weakling's personality. Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth and said angrily, "Shut up. Just because he lost his consciousness doesn't mean that he's really gone. You must be hiding him." She resisted him. Her eyes, actions, and body were all sincerely resisting his approach. Zero stared at her silently for a long time, as if he suddenly thought of something and heaved a sigh of relief. Then he raised his delicate chin, revealing his beautiful neck. It was obvious that his movements were tense and forceful. Then Wei Wei Bai watched as he tugged at the buttons on his collar. Under those white fingertips, the buttons were so fragile that they couldn't withstand a single blow. His collarbone was exposed to the air. His voice had a hint of irritation. "I really don't like this feeling of losing control." Wei Wei Bai didn't understand his actions at first. After all, she felt that people shouldn't be too beastly. In her current state, she was going to die. So, when Zero grabbed her long hair and even lowered his head to kiss her, she blinked and looked at him blankly. She actually didn't just jump off the tree and run away. When Zero lowered his head, his eyes were still staring at her, just like the eyes that were filled with dark desire when he destroyed the laboratory before he exploded. "I think I should be honest with you." He wrapped his fingers around her hair and covered it bit by bit. "I lost control." He seemed to be talking about someone else. "I crave your attention, love, and active contact." Zero was terrifyingly honest, and his words were so calm that it made one's scalp tingle. He held Wei Wei Bai's hand and forced it to his face. "Look, that's it." Wei Wei Bai wanted to withdraw her hand. Zero said indifferently, "If you take it away, I might not be able to control myself and break it." "Wei Wei Bai, I don't dare to take it away." Just as Zero was about to do something crazy to her, Lin Yiqian's eyes lit up. Zero, on the other hand, unbuttoned his shirt, revealing his chest. Then, he slowly pressed down her hand on his face and laid down on her lap. His long hair was disheveled, and his golden eyes reflected the white flowers in the sky as he stared quietly at Wei Wei Bai. "I haven't slept in a long time, so I want you to comfort me to sleep." Wei Wei Bai, this shameless guy, can't he sleep on his own? How old is he already? I think he hasn't even been out of his shell for more than a year. Furthermore, why would she take off her clothes? It would cause misunderstandings. In the next second, Zero moved her hand to his chest. His skin was burning hot, and his heart was beating violently. Zero's calm face was completely different from his physical condition. He spoke unhurriedly with a cold and clear tone. "Take the initiative to hug me and stabilize my body. Otherwise, I will keep losing control." Since the beginning of the infection, his body's condition had become more and more serious. It was not something that could be suppressed by reason. He could only rely on her. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and stared at him with a cold expression. Zero slowly closed his eyes, and under his long eyelashes, the shadow of his eyes was thick. "Just treat me as him. One night is fine." Wei Wei Bai paused and was silent for a long time. Just as Zero was about to lose control again because of her, she gently stroked his face with her other hand. It was so gentle. Her hoarse and suppressed voice sounded, "Good night." She clearly wasn't talking to him, but Zero's slightly dark and crazy expression slowly disappeared. Then, a sweet feeling of satisfaction surged up. He was caught off guard, but he didn't suppress or block it. Ding, Dewa's favorability is at 70. To read the ad, https://www.sashu.com/to read ad. https://www.sashu.com to read at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2179. Wei Wei Bai didn't know when she fell asleep. When she woke up, she found herself back in her original room. In the cold, white room, there were sounds coming from the kitchen. It must be Dewa cooking again. Fourth baby's infection made him follow a lot of living habits automatically. For example, when she needed nourishment, when she needed to eat, how much she needed to eat, what she needed to eat so that she could eat. That care was all given to Dewa. But Dewa's cold dead look made her feel uncomfortable when she ate. Wei Wei Bai went to wash up and stopped vomiting. The airball was about 3 months old, and it didn't make a fuss at all. Wei Wei Bai, will this thing really kill me? System, yes, I've calculated. You and this airball are in conflict, but in reality, energy pacification can stop it from making a fuss before you die. The so-called energy pacification. It was Dewa who had been deliberately suppressing the mania of the ball in her stomach. And he even took her to the tree of life to receive the nourishment of her body's energy. Wei Wei Bai rinsed her mouth and combed her hair. Does that mean my strategy time is shortened to a few months? Because Dewa was very confident at first glance. He felt that he could make her give birth to an air balloon. But when she gave birth, her horoscope with this plane would be difficult to give birth. Bye-bye. She really shed tears of sympathy for herself. The main system never let her have a good time, missing her beautiful little cookie for nth day. After Wei Wei Bai walked out, she saw Zero's precise and elegant movements setting the table. It was really extravagant to eat like this in the apocalypse, because when supplies were tight, having a can of nutrient solution was already good enough. But ever since Zero came to this base, they never lacked resources. Those mercenaries were fattened up. Other than enduring Zero's outbursts from time to time, the treatment of the scientists also increased. They could eat and drink well, but they couldn't be afraid. Worried that the lab would explode again, Wei Wei Bai calmly walked over. She was going to pretend to take a can as a gesture. Then Dewa would beg her to eat. She would be polite again and eat like she had no choice. Haha, what a perfect plan. In the end, when she opened the cupboard where the canned food was stored, the canned food was gone. She still had the nutrient solution. He opened another cabinet, but there was nothing inside. A thief? Wei Wei Bai stared at an empty cabinet. She didn't notice the man behind her. She leaned against the table and narrowed her cold eyes. She just looked at her doubtful expression. He was dumbfounded for a while. Wei Wei Bai couldn't swallow her pride and eat other people's food. After all, he wasn't her little angel. She might even mock and ridicule him. Wei Wei Bai curled her lips. At most, she wouldn't eat it. It would be even better if she could make the airball thin. However, as soon as she closed the cabinet and took a step back, her body bumped into something. A chair had appeared behind her out of nowhere. Zero casually reached out and pressed her down on the chair. He swiveled his chair. He faced the dining table. He moved quickly and didn't talk nonsense. He seemed to have noticed that Wei Wei Bai wanted to get up. He pressed one hand on the back of the chair and the other hand on her shoulder. He leaned down gently. Under his long eyelashes, his cold golden eyes looked at her indifferently. I improved the recipe. His breath was as fresh as mint. His expression even softened by 2 points. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Her light-colored lips were still pale from exhaustion. Chapter 2180. Seeing her actions, the gold in Zero's eyes flickered. If you don't like me, then eat well and recover, he said casually and then let go of her. He reached out and picked up a piece of crispy, stir-fried vegetable. I will help you sort out the messy energy in your body and take you to the tree of life to nourish it every day. After you give birth, you will recover your superpower. At that time, you can hit me. I won't resist. He gently put the piece of vegetable to her lips. His eyes were serious and his actions didn't change. So don't starve yourself. Bai Weiwei blinked and tugged at the corner of her mouth. I can hit you now. Zero was expressionless and said calmly, if you hit me now, I'm afraid your hand will hurt. Her physical fitness was worse than an ordinary person's. She could hit him, but he was worried that she wouldn't be able to take it. Was he still human when he said that? Bai Weiwei's eyes sharpened as she glared at him. Then, she opened her mouth and ate the vegetable. The taste was a little different from Little Angel's. but it was equally delicious. Zero looked at the empty tip of the chopsticks and slowly put them away. By Wei Wei, I'm so humble that I even have the action of feeding food. Just eat it with great mercy, B.A. If you don't eat now, the food will get cold. So when Zero picked up some other food again, Wei Wei Bai already disliked him like a snail and picked up the chopsticks and bowled herself. Then, like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds, they ate and drank as usual. It was so boring to eat a meal. She deserved to finish the meal. Zero picked up the food and watched her eat for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he put the food into his mouth. Pregnant women ate faster, didn't they? After the meal, Wei Wei Bai put her hands on her waist and went for a walk to digest. Zero was in charge of everything in the base. She was now a big rice worm. Zero slowly took the folder of data and followed her while quickly recording some important data. This was recorded in the base every day. Wei Wei Bai used to be in charge of this task. Zero took over it himself. His fair fingertips tapped on the data in the folder and calculated the difference in the data of the materials entering and leaving the base. He could even see if there was any corruption or how much was lost. These were all processed by the computer, so he could calculate them by himself. When they reached the square, Wei Wei Bai suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked at the light shield that was used to calculate strength, and her eyes were filled with confusion and sorrow. Zero also stopped and looked at the shield of light. She immediately remembered what the other personality had done. Wei Wei Bai only took a few glances and then continued to walk forward. He did not turn around again. The pen in Zero's finger knocked against the folder and broke. He seemed to be overly tense as he took a deep breath. Then he continued to walk with her. Suddenly, he realized something and looked outside coldly. The entrance of the square was the protective shield of the base outside. The apocalyptic land of yellow sand was very peaceful. It was so calm that none of the instruments showed any abnormalities. But Zero tilted her head and thought for a while. There was still enough time. Before the monster tide arrived, it should be time for her to take a nap. So Zero did not say anything. He even secretly stretched out his finger, opened a spatial rift, and sent out a terrifying power. It appeared out of thin air in front of the monster tide in the distance and stopped them for a while. This way, it would not matter if Wei Wei Bai slept a little later, because those monsters had not arrived yet. At https://www.sashu.com/full-text at https://www.sashu.com download at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com//. Chapter 2181. After Wei Wei Bai finished her stroll, she played Gamoku for fun and then went to take a nap. Zero tidied up the chess pieces, one by one flowing through his fingertips. Then the chess pieces automatically gathered into a ball and returned to their respective boxes. After making sure that she was asleep, Zero then got up, casually tore open space, and walked in. Seeing that the male lead had left, the system secretly whispered in the host's ear, "The male lead has left. The monster tide is here. Meow meow. Wake up." Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes, then yawned lazily. "The monster tide is here." The system looked from afar. "Damn, there's so many little monsters, and there's even a super huge monster." Wei Wei Bai said, "The Monster King is here too." The Monster King would be on the move, but their base had not encountered it before. All the bases that they had encountered had been wiped out. Wei Wei Bai was about to get up, but halfway through, she pulled the blanket over herself and was extremely lazy. "I'm pregnant now, and I don't have any superpowers. Why would I go out looking for death? Zero can just carry me." Anyway, the wall was very durable. It was good to use it more often. With such an awesome superpower, the Monster King should not be able to defeat him. So Wei Wei Bai closed her eyes in relief. "Let me sleep until I wake up naturally. If there's nothing very important, there's no need to report." Because during this time, there were only trivial matters. In addition, Although she was pregnant with an airball, she had the reactions of a pregnant woman. She could slack off as much as she could. As for the strategy, there were still 3 unfinished, so there was no need to worry about it. If there was only one, she might be more spirited. 3 of them. I'll let her rest first. The system looked at the lazy host and fell into deep confusion. The host was so lazy that he did not even feel the favorability points. Then he silently picked up the embroidery needle, recently accepting the job of embroidering a smiley face of the Teru Bozu. 100 life points a day. How profitable. The system was addicted to crafting, unable to extricate itself, and the lazy host today, living a beautiful and peaceful life. The monsters came in a frenzy. Amidst the yellow sand, a leisurely figure gracefully appeared. The power of space distortion crackled as it descended from the sky. 4 terrifyingly tall walls of power were erected. His long black hair gently fluttered in the air. The young man's feet floated in the air. He stretched out his hands like a painter, binding all the monsters in one place. Less than 100 meters behind him was Wei Wei's base. The base was still calm. The higher-ups had already known that the monsters were coming, but they had been instructed not to do so. They couldn't give any warnings. He also couldn't let the people in the base be afraid and make a sound, because it would wake up their base leader, Wei Bai, who was taking an afternoon nap. Everyone who knew what was going on ran behind the protective shield, thinking that there would be a bloody battle. However, what they saw was a terrifying and miraculous scene. The Monster King and all the other monsters raised their heads and let out a shrill howl. The violent power collided with the 4 spatial walls. It was as if the sky had been torn open. Yellow sand surged up violently, and ink-like dark clouds covered the sky. Under the Monster King's crazy command, all the monsters used their lives to crash into the wall. And Zero, who was standing outside the wall, he just watched quietly. The cruel flesh and blood were like a thick and colorful oil painting. They smashed into the wall of the spatial power. All the monsters that rushed up were torn apart. They were swept into the sky again. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and the yellow sand tumbled. The young man who caused all this only lowered his head and looked at his palm. Fast to read the full article, fast to TXT. Download fast to read the fast comma. Chapter 2182. His palm was as white as jade, flawless. He calculated in his mind. It was almost time for him to go back. Just as he was thinking about this, he casually clenched his fingers together and clenched them into a fist one by one. The power of the 4 walls also closed in. Thousands of monsters were crushed into pieces, sucked into the violent space. And the Monster King finally put all his eggs in one basket. The new king of the apocalypse roared, his flesh and blood separated on its own, shaking the walls of space. The wall shattered inch by inch. Zero blinked. His cold golden eyes glowed beautifully. He originally wanted to let his 3rd personality come out and eat the Monster King, which would be good for him. Of course, he could also eat it himself, but it would be a bit dirty. But then he thought about how much the 3rd personality liked Wei Bai, almost to the point of love. He suppressed that thought. If that hungry personality lost control because of love, Wei Bai might be eaten by him. So Zero sighed, a bit annoyed. Why didn't you just die? Why did you have to scream so loudly? Someone needs to take a nap. The walls of space finally shattered. The Monster King was covered in blood, rushing towards its enemy. The beautiful young man with a slender and elegant figure levitating in the air. Then, under everyone's horrified gazes, Zero disappeared from where she stood. He reappeared on top of the monster's head. Under the terrifying pressure, his finger was cut open. But the Monster King was also done for. Because Zero took out its brain, there was a beautiful crystal core in the middle of its brain. Zero frowned in disgust. For the first time, a cautious expression appeared in his deep golden eyes. He carefully took out a handkerchief, wrapped the crystal core full of blood, then jumped down. The Monster King also fell down. A second later, Zero appeared at the entrance of the base, slowly tidied up his sleeves, and walked in. Collect everything that can be used and store them. We'll sell them at the next market, he coldly ordered. Everyone, including the mercenaries, scientists, and surveillance personnel, knelt down, almost worshipping him. When the Monster King was here, there were thousands of other monsters. They thought that it was their own base that was going to be destroyed. Who would have thought that they would survive and easily destroy the monster horde that no human could fight against? This was simply the power of a god. Zero cleaned the crystal nucleus and absorbed it with his hands. The hungry personality could also absorb this way, but once the hunger got to his head, he might even eat the Monster King alive, let alone wash it. After absorbing it, a power that did not belong to him appeared. The power was still unfamiliar to him. He carefully enveloped it with his own power and left it there to absorb later. Because it was almost time for his afternoon nap. He needed to prepare food for the afternoon, a simple and delicious meal for pregnant women. Wei Wei Bai's biological clock kicked in. At a fixed time, she lazily woke up with a yawn. She saw Zero sitting beside her, staring at her with a deep and silent gaze. Although she was used to him being a human monitor, he still had to keep an eye on her even when she was asleep. It was too terrifying. Wei Wei Bai's lips twitched. What's the matter? The young man seemed to have just washed his face, and his eyelashes were stained with some clean water. This made his moist eyes look even softer. Zero lowered his eyes, as if hesitating about something. Wei Wei Bai felt that his emotions seemed to be brewing, but she could not figure out what he wanted to do. Could it be that she accidentally scolded him in her sleep when she was asleep? Was he holding a grudge to take revenge on her? Just as Wei Wei Bai was calling the system to ask what had happened, Zero finally changed. There was finally a change in Zero's expression. His cold and noble expression had a hint of hesitation, just as Wei Wei Bai thought that he was going to lose control. He sighed as if he had accepted his fate and gently stretched out his fingers. Fresh blood beads appeared on his fingertips. They slid down his fair fingers. He pursed his lips and lowered his eyelashes. There was a hint of emotion on his fair face. Even his voice was as soft as a murmur. I am injured. Chapter 2183. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, then at the small wound on his finger that could be easily healed with okay tension. It was a small bead of blood that was squeezed out. It was such a serious wound. Did he cut it when he was cutting vegetables? She looked at the young man's terrifyingly rational and cold face, suddenly becoming so obedient and hesitant. Was he flirting? Using a small wound to attract her attention, then asking her to coax him? Fourth baby might be able to do that. Why was eldest baby doing the same? Was eldest baby so contagious that he was poisoned by fourth baby? Even the way he coaxed her was similar to how obedient he was. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly and ignored him. Zero slowly put away his awkward and obedient expression. He remembered fourth baby's memories very clearly. Every time that personality did that, she would feel sorry for him and comfort him. Was he not embarrassed enough? Or was his wound not serious enough? That monster was to blame as well. It was so weak that it could not even cause a bigger wound on his body. Zero silently looked down on the Monster King. Wei Wei Bai felt that if Zero had cat ears, they would be drooping down. Following her silence, a terrifying resentment seemed to be gathering above his head. Wei Wei Bai asked the system. He got a wound from cutting vegetables, yet he feels so wronged. The system hugged the Terabozu and finally told the truth. No, he just killed 20,000 monsters and a Monster King, Li Yao said. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She then remembered that the system said before she went to sleep that Zero was going to deal with the monster tide. She thought that it was just chasing them away, or else how could the base be so peaceful? But the monster tide was completely wiped out? What did that mean? One monster could wipe out half of a less professional mercenary group. No base could fight against a monster tide with a Monster King. There was not a single human base in history that was unscathed after clashing with a Monster King's army. The system said, that's terrible. I always sympathize with that monster. The blood, flesh, and bones were all scattered. It was scarier than any zombie movie. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. It did sound miserable, Wei Wei Bai said. I didn't hear anything when I was sleeping. The system said there's no sound in the base because the male lead ordered everyone not to make sound. Whoever makes a sound will end up as a monster. Would you be afraid? Wei Wei Bai looked at the innocent, weak, pitiful look in front of her. Not really. The young man. He replied, fuck, I'm so scared. The system said, the Monster King was such a powerful boss, yet he died so miserably. Half of his brain was dug out, and the wound on the male lead's wound was accidentally scratched by the crystal core when he was digging out someone's brain. Wei Wei Bai, why is the target of this plane so terrifyingly powerful? The system fell silent. He didn't know how strong the male lead was in this world. He was so strong that it was unreasonable. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Was he even human? It was a few levels higher than a monster's combat strength. They were not from the same plane at all. He was the world's top monster, and all the elites were dispatched from the monster's nest in the apocalypse. Yet, they were all killed by the male lead's meat grinder in more than an hour. They were not from the same plane at all. Did the system make a mistake when it distributed the missions? Wei Wei Bai didn't get an answer. Instead, she saw that Zero was about to retract his finger. His pretense of being obedient was slowly replaced by a gloomy and terrifying coldness. A huge meat grinder appeared in front of Wei Wei Bai. Zero grabbed her by the collar and threw her in. Don't coax me. Change the dumpling filling. Download the ad. https://m Sasha. Com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2184. Zero was silent as he looked at her calm, disdainful, and cold face. It seemed that she didn't feel anything when he pretended to be that personality. Just as he was about to retract his fingers, another pair of hands suddenly wrapped around them. It was soft and warm contact. Zero's fingers froze. The blood on his fingertips trembled and flowed down. She leaned over from a distance of a finger, and her breath brushed against his fingers. The warm breath seemed to caress him inadvertently. Zero stared at her. His beautiful golden eyes were deep. Wei Wei Bai wasn't as childish as she was with fourth baby. Instead, she frowned and said, "How did you get hurt? Are you cutting vegetables in the kitchen?" After all, she couldn't discuss how miserable the Monster King's death was with him. It was safer to talk about the kitchen. What if he got carried away after killing so many monsters and wanted to chop her into mincemeat too? The corners of Zero's lips curled up slightly for a moment before he suppressed it and said softly, "Yes." A faint and soft hum. It wasn't his style at all. Wei Wei Bai pointed at a drawer not far away. "There's a medical box there." Zero didn't look away. The drawer opened automatically, and the medical box passed through a short space and appeared beside Wei Wei Bai. This heaven-defying power made people lazy. He didn't even take the box himself, and had to use such extravagant power. Wei Wei Bai opened the box, took out a very small bandage, and stuck it on his fingertip. Her actions weren't very attentive and considerate, but her attitude was a little better, and this little bit made Zero stare at her in a daze for a long time. Then, he pursed his lips slightly and looked away again. Eat something. She needed to eat something after her afternoon nap. Pregnant women couldn't resist hunger. This was the plan that personality made after he came out. It was all right. He didn't have the space to change it even if he wanted to. Wei Wei Bai had eaten one meal, so there would be another. After eating, she, the person in charge of the base who was waiting to die, went out for a walk. Zero didn't say anything and walked out side by side with her. When she arrived at the square, she saw countless monster corpses. Monster corpses were excellent materials for weapons. Some of the monster meat was delicious and contained a lot of energy. The corpse of a huge monster king was piled in the middle. It was like a treasure trove. The resources obtained from this wave of monsters were all sold at the market. Their base was the wealthiest and most powerful base in the apocalypse. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, seemingly in disbelief. What happened? Zero saw her confused yet pleasantly surprised expression, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Then, he suppressed it and calmly said, "When you were taking a nap, these things were a little noisy, so I went out to practice, and then they all died." Wei Wei Bai stood there in a daze for a while, looking at the Monster King. He said to the system, "Has this pretentious prick been holding back the urge to show off for too long?" He had specially brought her here to see it, yet he still had to calmly say such a sentence. Perhaps he was already overjoyed. The system said, "Maybe he just wants to show off to you." After all, after he killed these things, he was really calm. Even if everyone in the base knelt down and worshipped him like a god. The male lead still looked like he was saying, "Get away from me, you bunch of bugs, don't dirty my road." Wei Wei Bai said, actually, he could have pretended a few more times. If he pretended a few more times, there wouldn't be enough monsters left in the apocalypse for him to kill. Download the at https://m Sashu. Com button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 2185. Wei Wei Bai restrained the corners of her mouth from rising, but she wanted Zero to see that she was happy. Her face was about to cramp up for a comedy effect. In the end, Wei Wei Bai covered her mouth with her hand and said in a muffled voice, "Very good." This sentence was very good. In fact, she wanted to laugh, but she held it in. But in Zero's ears, the muffled voice seemed to contain uncontrollable happiness. It tickled the tip of his ear. Originally, it was just a cleaning mission, but now it made her happy. Zero's fingertips moved. The power of these hands could not only survive, but also make people happy. It was not that personality who made her happy. It was him. Wei Wei Bai saw that everyone in the base was happy. As the person in charge, she had to do something, so that everyone would not forget her. So she used the radio to announce that there would be a grand bonfire banquet tonight. The banquets now were not the polite banquets of ancient times. Instead, they were more boorish. They lit a big bonfire, roasted meat, drank wine, and danced. The most important thing was that they were lively and full of food and drink. As expected, when this news came out, everyone was overjoyed. Who would not be happy to be able to have a holiday, drink, eat meat, dance, and flirt? Seeing the base members roaring in unison and throwing their hats, Wei Wei Bai took a step back. A hint of happiness finally appeared in her tired eyes, and the young man standing behind her, handsome and exquisite, with a gentle smile on his cold and rational face. Many years later, there were still people who remembered this scene. The powerful guardian of a base. The gentle person in charge of the base. Like the brightest stars in the end of the world, they accompanied each other. Wei Wei Bai was only in charge of making the radio broadcast and giving permission. The rest was done by the people below. When it was 8 o'clock, the dance party began. A huge bonfire burned in the square. Food and supplies from the warehouse came out of the warehouse in carts. The fragrant food was all placed on the table in the square for their own use. Some people played drums, some people played the piano. There was an unlimited supply of alcohol. Thousands of people gathered in several piles. They sang and danced happily. Wei Wei Bai sat on a chair. Their side was the largest group of people. But the strange thing was that there was no one around her except Zero. The rest of the people kept a distance of a few people, not daring to approach. Although everyone was happy, the way they looked at Zero was like they were looking at a god. There was a strong sense of worship and respect. Zero did not notice the gazes of others. He calmly cut some non-greasy barbecued meat. Wei Wei Bai refused to eat monster meat, so he only cut the meat of ordinary poultry. Under his precise control, the thin slices of meat were dipped in the sauce. Wei Wei Bai felt that she could eat her fill tonight. Moreover, as long as the airball didn't cause a ruckus, she would be fine. Her belly wasn't showing yet. After eating a few slices of meat, Zero put some vegetables on the plate. It was a combination of meat and vegetables. Anyway, she would eat it. This kind of life. Salted fish was great. The system was also silently embroidering the Terubozu. It had embroidered 50 of the 100 Terubozu per day health points. It was still a day where the salted fish host and the handcraft hobby system would just muddle along and wait to die. Zero looked at the crowd with an unusually cold and distant gaze. It was as if there was a thick wall between them that could not affect him at all. His posture was elegant, and he calmly continued cutting the meat. He thought that it was time to bring her back to rest. Suddenly, his knife paused, and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. This was because the Monster King's power had been completely digested. As expected, in the next second, his body naturally returned to normal. Slash. Chapter 2186. His golden pupils had a deeper feeling and seemed even more clear and serene. The brand new energy made his body more perfect and strong. Those violent energies had all become nourishment for his body. The other two personalities even let out a comfortable sigh at the same time. The current him did not need to kill any monsters, because those monsters would treat him as the new king and completely submit to him. The world of monsters was simpler than that of humans. The powerful bloodline command would make all monsters submit under the pressure of the genes. His body now had all the aura of that Monster King, and he also had a strong hypnotic ability. Zero blinked and suddenly looked at Wei Wei Bai. She lowered her eyes and ate quietly, neither fast nor slow. He could not see what she was thinking. Was she still thinking about that personality? This ability could make her tell the truth and then forget it afterward. Zero slowly cut up some meat slices and placed more easily digestible food on the plate. She could freely take it. The drink was still milk with fruit juice. It was sweet and sour. Wei Wei Bai ate until her eyes narrowed. Delicious, too delicious. If she continued to conquer this plane, she would gain more than 10 kilograms. Her beautiful face was bloated and bloated. Suddenly, a hand gently landed on her thin shoulder, and a cold aura attacked. Bai Weiwei looked up and saw Zero sitting beside her. His eyes were deep and serene. She was in a trance, as if she had fallen into a paradise full of feathers. She heard the angel's questioning voice. "Do you like me?" Wei Wei Bai could actually understand who was asking this question. She did not have the slightest awareness of lying. The corners of her eyes rose, her eyes were cold, and the corners of her mouth could not help but curve. It was full of disdain and disgust. Who gave you the courage to ask such a question, like you? How is that possible? After saying this, the feathers of heaven seemed to have turned into white snow. It was chilly. Wei Wei Bai did not understand what was wrong with her for a moment. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. It sounded like the system. The system roared beside her ear. "Wake up, you've been hypnotized. Just a few more questions, and you've already told him everything." If this was any other dimension, the target's favorability would be at 99. Wei Wei Bai revealed her true colors of disdain. The male lead would immediately strangle this female liar to death. Wei Wei Bai suddenly woke up, only to see Ling's deep and cold eyes. "Then is he your favorite person?" For a moment, she didn't understand who he was asking, but out of habit, she nodded. Nodded? Air. Hurry up and pretend that you were hypnotized. Pretend that you didn't nod your head. It would be best if you could ask her who she fell in love with. She would definitely tell him shyly that she had a crush on him, and then she would naturally use the sweet route to successfully capture Dawa. Wei Wei Bai looked at Zero blankly. He looked like he hadn't woken up yet. But Zero didn't say anything and remained silent. Under the backdrop of the huge bonfire, his face hidden in the shadows was as cold as snow. The terrifying silence made people feel incomparably oppressed. Zero closed his eyes, covering his golden eyes. He was struggling violently, uncontrollably. He still only liked the weakest personality. He twisted his fingers. He had the urge to create a cage to lock her up. He would use that kind of prison vine. It was harmless to people, but there was almost no material that could break it. Even a psychic wouldn't be able to escape. Not to mention that she couldn't use her abilities now. The cage had to be big enough. It would be best to build a spatial energy wall on the outer layer. That way, no one could enter and she couldn't come out. How nice. Chapter 2187. His tongue licked his thin lips. "Do you like it?" My partner with a complex. The person who made his heart move for the first time. The person who made him feel possessive for the first time. The beauty of the fledgling complex turned into a dark and evil temptation on him. He turned Wei Wei Bai into a prisoner in his prison. It was just an innate tie. If the main personality wasn't facing losing control, he wouldn't let him out. After all, how could he hide the dark thoughts he had towards his fledgling complex? When the weak personality was broken and infected, he was the furthest away and the infection was the least. But the possessiveness that grew from the darkness expanded infinitely. The main personality clearly had that kind of thought, but he didn't dare to touch her again. He even pretended to be a weakling to win her weak sympathy. How ridiculous! He laughed until he couldn't sit up. Zero's thin red lips curved into a beautiful smile. If it was him, he wouldn't be as unrestrained as the main personality. If you want something, you will get it by any means, right? You will get by force, right? It was fine even if she struggled in the end. She was still his even if she was broken. He didn't mind at all. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was blinded by Zero's beautiful smile that was like a rose. This monster. It was completely different from the two personalities in front of her. Everyone was partying. The fast-paced drum and piano, dancing around the fire, and the sound of barbecuing meat. It formed a blurry and noisy background. It made Zero's half-gloomy face in the darkness look like Satan descending to the world, evil and unbelievably perfect. Her ankle was completely numb. If she wasn't wearing pants today, she wouldn't dare to imagine what this guy could do in public. No, wearing pants wasn't safe either. The personality in front of her, even if he was fully dressed, could make people kill each other with just a look. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She struggled for a long time, and a trace of humiliation appeared on her face. Her voice was suppressed, cold, and angry. Let go of me. Ew, she couldn't say anything, and she couldn't scold Vixen. Her persona had collapsed. Zero replied lazily, She dragged out the syllable and sounded sweet. Are you angry? He smiled, and there was a hateful smugness in his smile. He lazily shifted his body and leaned against her. He rested his head on her shoulder and breathed in the fragrance of her hair. His voice was magnetic and hoarse. Be good, don't struggle. The more you struggle, the more excited I feel. He had goosebumps all over. As expected, Wei Wei Bai stopped struggling and looked at him calmly. I think you're sick. Do you need me to fill in the application form for you to become a psychiatrist? Under the dim light of the fire, Zero's grayish-blue hair added a layer of misty beauty. He was not angry or annoyed at what she said. Instead, he couldn't help but laugh. The corners of his eyes curled up slightly, and his voice became gentler. A smile that was as sweet as poison also appeared. Of course I'm sick. You're my illness. You're beyond cure. Just listen to her sweet talk skills. She thought of the adorable fourth baby and then looked at the expressionless eldest baby. Of those two personalities, one was qualified to act coquettishly, while the other was qualified to act rationally. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf, if you like. Chapter 2188. But when it came to being a bad man, a scumbag was not qualified. His mouth was not even 1/10 as good as Erwa. Wei Wei Bai smiled coldly. Is that so? Then I wish you the best of luck. Zero's fingers gently caressed her face, drawing her gaze to him. Doa's clothes were more restrained, and the buttons were tightly buttoned. But when she looked at him, Zero had already unbuttoned the top few buttons casually. This half-hidden and half-exposed neck, the white collarbone under the neckline. These were all fatal seduction methods. Zero's eyes were languid and gorgeous. His thin lips opened slightly. Then you have to work hard. My illness, work hard to let me die. Oh, Wei Wei Bai thought. This kind of man not only wants money, but also lives. If he stood outside, the number of men and women who supported him could circle the earth 10 times. In ancient times, he would be a demoness who brought disaster to the country. In modern times, there was no doomsday, but he could make doomsday happen. She silently looked away. She felt that if she continued to look, not only would she have a nosebleed, but she would also have a cerebral hemorrhage. Zero was neither fast nor slow. His fingers wrapped around her hair. His white fingertips were black strands of hair. There was a different kind of beauty. His head leaned on her shoulder. His brownish-red eyes were deep and evil. From afar, he was almost attached to Wei Wei Bai. He was like an evil dragon that had seized all the treasures. When others saw it, they immediately did not dare to look. That scene was too impactful. It was also because of Zero's charming eyes. Once he looked at others, they were so cold that they could not see the bottom. Zero seemed to be bored. He gently touched her face with his fingers. With a satisfied and beautiful smile, he said, "Let's do something else, okay?" Wei Wei Bai was incomparably cold. "No, let go of me." Zero pretended not to hear. He bent down, reached under her armpits and knees, and picked her up easily. To her opinion, he only listened to what he wanted to hear. What he did not want to hear, he automatically filtered. Zero stepped into the cracked space. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were different. The bonfire party was gone. It was her room. She lay on the soft white bed, her long hair draped over the pillow. The young man on his body had long lost his youthful temperament. Instead, it was so sweet and flirtatious that it made one's scalp tingle. He looked at her calm face. There was no excitement in her beautiful and cold eyes. Zero tilted his head. His eyes darkened and his laughter became hoarse. "Why do you hate me so much? I'm clearly much stronger than that little idiot." Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with anger. "It's better than you being shameless." These words were too impactful. Ling was stunned for a moment. Then, he said aggrievedly, "You're the only one I've hooked up with. When we first met, you were very nice to me. You even gave me flowers. I didn't take the initiative to throw myself at you. How did you become a pervert?" Wei Wei Bai stopped him from pressing down. Her voice was extremely calm. "This is the first time we're meeting, and you were created by me. It's only right for me to be polite to you." But Zero rested his face on one hand and lay down beside her. He said softly, "But you only want that little idiot. So when you see us appear, it's as if we've snatched his body. You're starting to feel hostile towards us?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes narrowed. She did not answer. "Save button you'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf, if you like." Chapter 2189. But her attitude was obvious. Zero smiled even more beautifully. "Let me guess. Have you been secretly looking up information on multiple personalities recently? You even focused on how to destroy the other personalities and protect one specific personality?" Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. She didn't refute, but she didn't answer either. Zero turned over lazily and lay on the bed next to Wei Wei Bai. His lips were only a few centimeters away from her cheek. The man's voice was so pleasant that it could seduce one's soul. "I'll help you." Wei Wei Bai looked at him suspiciously, but the sarcasm in her eyes was very obvious. Zero was as sweet as an evil poison apple. "Really, I'll help you. Let's kill the main personality together and get rid of the personality that only knows how to eat. Then, won't your little angel be left?" Wei Wei Bai. If she didn't know that the little angel was swallowed and couldn't come back, she would have believed him. This guy had the ability to charm people. He could make people believe him willingly. Wei Wei Bai almost succeeded in seducing him. Thank goodness for the emotion blocker. Her voice was still cold. "Oh, then you're still left." Zero immediately held his face with both hands and pretended to be shocked. "I love you so much. I'm so considerate of you, and I can even give you supreme happiness. Can't you just like me a little?" Speaking of this, his eyes turned red and he murmured sadly, "You're so heartless. All I want is a little bit of love and protection. Then I'll quietly hide in your body and not come out, secretly loving you." Wei Wei Bai felt that she had met a strange actor. Damn, all the personalities. Erwa was probably the most pretentious. Look at how pretentious he was. He had the style of courting death. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't walk the path of a little white flower in this world, she would have appreciated him and become a pair of plastic sisters. The way she looked at him was still as cold as when they first met. It was as if she was looking at an object. She wasn't disgusted by his pretentious attitude at all. Wei Wei Bai said indifferently, "Do you know what time it is now?" "Zero, I love you time." Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a moment before she said, "Pregnant women need time to sleep. Do you know how uncomfortable my body is right now? Do you know my schedule? Do you know what a father needs to do for a pregnant mother?" A series of questions. A blank expression appeared on Zero's face. Wei Wei Bai stretched out a finger and pointed it at his head as if she was executing a death sentence. "You don't know anything, so why are you making trouble? I need a sensible and virtuous man, not a man who comes out to flirt with bees and butterflies. Zero, his charm seemed to be nothing to her. Zero's self-esteem was hurt. Although he was about to pull himself together and continue the ambiguous atmosphere to achieve his goal. It made this night very beautiful. But in the next second, Wei Wei Bai completely ruined the night. Her face paled. Suddenly, she struggled to crawl to the side of the bed and vomited. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Doa impulsively ran away. Without anyone to pacify the energy ball, it would explode again. Her body would begin to be tormented again. Zero's beautiful expression, which was like a snake or scorpion, disappeared. His expression changed. Wei Wei Bai didn't answer. Her face was frighteningly pale. She was suddenly pulled into a familiar, yet strange embrace. It was Zero's embrace. He saw that her pink lips were stained with the color of blood. It was frighteningly mournful. // Chapter 2190. She immediately reached out and covered her stomach. The energy inside was frighteningly violent. If she wasn't a psychic, her body would have been torn apart by the energy during her pregnancy. It was already very impressive that she could hold on until now. The corners of Ling's eyes twitched a little, gorgeous and vicious. This child can't be kept. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that the child could still be kept. Otherwise, she would be ruined by Erwa. The way he looked at her just now was determined. If she wasn't pregnant, who knew how she would be tied up by the power of space? What did he do? So Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his clothes tightly. She said weakly, "Don't touch my child. He was a very good airball to use. It could increase favorability, avoid bad contact, and let her eat and drink well without having to work." Ling saw her tragic expression, and a rare look of confusion appeared on his face. "You'll die." Wei Wei Bai weakly squeezed out a gentle smile. "It's okay. I can hold on." Fourth will want to get rid of this airball, but he was swallowed by the master. If Erwa tried again, he would probably be swallowed too. Who knew if she would fail her mission if her personality didn't have 100 favorability points, was swallowed up? Wei Wei Bai wiped the corners of her mouth with difficulty. Her fingers were covered in blood. She sighed. The child is really lively. Even if she was so badly injured, she just smiled helplessly, full of doting. There was no trace of resentment or anxiety. It was as if to her, this child was the meaning of life. Wasn't this child born when a master was still alive? Although not strictly speaking, it was still his child. However, Ling didn't have any feelings. He even started to feel irritated when he saw Wei Wei Bai like this. There was a hint of mockery in his charming eyes, and there was a flash of anger. He closed his eyes and coldly asked the master for a solution. Then, he stretched out his fingers like playing the piano and calmed the energy in the air. The gentle energy started to affect Wei Wei Bai's body. He comforted her tenderly. He needed to calm down, which was what Zero hated the most. What the primary personality was doing patiently, he was very irritated when he did it. What's the use of this damn child? Although they would definitely be similar to them when they were born, their abilities would definitely be powerful. But what was the use? He was so powerful that he was almost invincible. It didn't matter whether he had an extra helper or an enemy. What was the point of having a child? Although he thought so, he still felt disdainful and aggrieved. He used his beautiful fingers to gently touch her stomach, so that the terrifying and violent energy could be calmed down. He was almost leaning on her shoulder. His eyes were still extremely luxurious, and his posture was languid and gorgeous. However, he was gently comforting her. Wei Wei Bai's physical condition slowly improved. She lowered her eyes, and there was a rare trace of quiet gentleness in her eyes. Zero seemed to notice her silence and looked up at her. Other than the first time they met, he rarely observed her normally. Every time, it was the memories of another personality that allowed him to experience different feelings for her. Especially that little idiot personality. The weakest personality was unable to resist their prying eyes. Therefore, his memories were all seen by the three personalities. This was also the reason why he couldn't escape when he was infected later on. At first, It was because of the good impression of the fledgling complex that he didn't have much resistance. // Chapter 2191. More importantly, when that personality was interacting with her, she gently coaxed him, and they had all seen it. After a long time, they even felt a terrifying sense of immersion. They felt that when she was gentle to that little idiot, she was actually coaxing them. She liked them. This caused the subsequent personality to shatter, and the infection of love had such a huge impact. The seductive charm in Zero's eyes slowly disappeared, and her breathing gradually softened. Zero looked at her defenseless as she fell asleep, leaning against him. Pregnant women seemed to prefer to sleep. There was still blood on her lips, and her pink lips had a few more traces of bright color. Zero's fingers were still on her stomach, and he felt the quiet and soft throbbing of life inside. His red, watery eyes stared at her for a long time. Finally, he gave up on a certain passionate thought and gently placed her on the pillow. Then, he leaned lazily beside her. "You're really troublesome." His voice was magnetic and low, with an unconscious seduction. The girl who was almost half lying in his arms was quiet. Even when she was sleeping, she didn't cause trouble for others. Zero lazily stretched out his fingers and gently touched her facial features. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her long eyelashes rubbed against his fingertips, giving him a ticklish feeling. Her small and exquisite nose, and her lips that had lost their color but were still beautiful. She usually looked at people with a straight face, but when she smiled, she could make many men fall for her. Zero thought of the other two personalities in his body. Although the main personality was absolutely rational and domineering, he would lose control. The hungry personality was more like a product of instinct, and there was only eating and killing in his mind. He was a more special personality and the incarnation of desire. To him, malicious seduction and evil bewitchment, they were all instincts and even things that made him happy. So when he saw her, he couldn't help but want to destroy her calm shell, to pull out her darkest desires. Unfortunately, there was none. She was still so cold to him, watching him dance alone like an outsider. What a failure. Only the personality of Little Idiot could make her treat him differently. Zero lowered his eyes, and under his long and thick eyelashes, his brown-red eyes were like wine, making people feel slightly tipsy. He smiled. "Little troublemaker, be good and don't run. Otherwise, I won't be gentle." Jealousy, evil, and viciousness was his nature. For example, when that little idiot's personality was shattered, he was the happiest person. If he couldn't get it, then no one could. This was how he felt when he saw her for the first time. He only had feelings for her, not to mention after infection. He had developed paranoid, seductive thoughts towards her. Before the infection, he thought it was a wonderful idea to make everyone go crazy for him. But after the infection, all he wanted was for her to go crazy for him. Wei Bai felt like she was sleeping next to a poisonous snake. All night long, she could hear the terrifying hissing sound of the poisonous snake. If it wasn't for the system's reminder, she thought that Erwa was plotting something against her again. When he woke up, he heard noises coming from the kitchen. Ever since Dewa and Erwa were infected, they both had Fourth Wa's life skills. How touching. Wei Bai's hair was messy, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She went to wash up first. When she came out of the bathroom, she saw a scene that made her dumbfounded. Zero lazily flipped his long hair, looked back at her, and smiled flirtatiously. The white space around the dining table was accentuated by his smile, creating a dazzling brilliance. Chapter 2192. He was sitting at the dining table with one leg resting on the chair. Under that simple and homely apron, he was wearing boxers. Wei Bai was stunned for a while before she suppressed the shock in her heart. She had seen a lot of things and had been blocked so many times. This was a piece of cake for her. After the shock, she returned to normal. Thus, she walked over calmly and pretended not to see it. She sat down calmly to eat. Anyway, she had eaten what Dewa cooked, so it didn't matter to Erwa. Ling placed his leg gently on the table. Then, he leaned lazily on the tablecloth with one hand supporting his cheek. His long hair fell to the side of the table. He smiled and said, "Is it good?" "Wei Wei Bai. To be honest, it's much worse than what Awa cooked." Ling bit his lip and frowned. "It made one's heart ache. Is it not good?" Wei Wei Bai replied calmly, "No, it's very delicious. Thank you for the breakfast." She was very polite, but she didn't look up. However, Zero's finger landed on her food. She tasted a little of it. His white fingertips had a little more aroma of food. He held it to her lips ambiguously. Ling's thin lips curled into a seductive and beautiful smile. His eyes were rippling and charming. "I'm more delicious." Wei Wei Bai. Then, she suddenly felt nauseous. It wasn't because of Erwa. After all, Erwa was really a feast for the eyes. It was because she had a bad appetite in the morning. Those wild fruits were all gone. Erwa, a restless man, didn't have the concept of making fruit juice. Thus, it was normal for her chest to feel tight and nauseous. Thus, when Ling's finger was about to touch her lips, the temptation reached its peak. Wei Wei Bai stood up, rushed to the bathroom, and threw up. Ling looked at his empty finger and listened to the sound of her vomiting. He stared blankly for a while, dumbfounded. His charm, was it so disgusting? Erwa's glass heart shattered. However, when he thought of Wei Wei Bai's discomfort, he immediately disappeared from the table. When he came to the bathroom, Wei Wei Bai already felt much better. She was washing her face and hands when she looked up and saw Zero. She thought for a moment and immediately said, "This is my personal reason. It's not that you're too disgusting. It has nothing to do with you." This was a double blow. It wasn't enough to deal a blow to him with his attitude, but he was going to deal another blow with his words. Zero's gorgeous smile, her seductive actions, and the ambiguous atmosphere. They were all dead. He felt like he was about to die. She was defeated by Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai wiped her face expressionlessly and said, "The temperature in the room is a bit low. If you don't wear clothes, you'll catch a cold easily." Zero staggered back a step and reached out to support herself against the door. Her sorrowful expression was enough to break anyone's heart. She wished she could give her life to him. However, Wei Wei Bai's stomach was like an empty balloon, and the little angel Siwa, who surrounded her every day, was not around. Dawa and Sanwa were also eyeing covetously. With so many bad things, her charm to Erwa was similar to a blind person's coquettish eyes. She didn't look at Erwa's heartbroken and beautiful expression at all. After wiping her face, her pink and white skin was a little red. However, it couldn't hide the explosive calmness in her eyes. She walked to the door. "Make way. You're blocking the door." Erwa leaned against the door and stretched out his long legs. That posture, that seduction, it was enough to make people unable to control themselves. However, Wei Wei Bai only saw his legs blocking the door. Chapter 2193. Erwa, had he become old and weak, or did he turn into an ugly freak overnight? He moved aside resentfully and let the scumbag Bai walk out calmly. She picked up the white coat and put it on. "I'm going to work. Don't mess around. Stay in the room obediently, okay?" She was worried about Erwa. One look, and one could tell that he was a flirt. He didn't have the reliance and peace of an angel or the old-fashioned rationality and professionalism. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai didn't care about his expression. She opened the door and closed the door. She didn't even say goodbye. Looking at the empty room, Ling suddenly rushed into the bathroom and looked left and right in the mirror. Had he become ugly? It was simply too scary. Did he have pimples or spots? Ling looked at himself for a few minutes and confirmed that he was still beautiful. His skin was so good that there were no flaws. When he smiled at her, she was mesmerized. Could it be that his seduction technique was too revealing? She didn't like to be too exposed? That's right. Ling tore off the apron on his body, revealing his slender and beautiful upper body. The seduction of the apron might not be to her taste. She probably liked the kind that was half exposed and didn't like to be straightforward. Ling nodded thoughtfully and then went to find a black suit jacket and a pink scheming shirt. Then he dressed up seriously and buttoned up the beautiful suit jacket. The top few buttons of the simple but flirtatious pink shirt were torn open, revealing his fair and delicate collarbone. He raised his chin slightly. He didn't like flirtatious women. He could also be cold and aloof. Who wasn't a drama queen? Zero calmly appeared in the square. Her cold and indifferent eyes contained a hint of charm as she glanced at those women. His beautiful thin lips gently curved into a trace of a smile that was not a smile. He seemed to be rational and calm, but his every move was eye-catching and seductive. All of a sudden, everyone was captivated. A few women sat on the ground weakly. Ling smiled coldly. This was a normal reaction. His beauty was irresistible. But his current prey and target was only one person. The rest were all eyesores, and it was boring to seduce them. Second baby was most seriously affected by fourth baby's single-mindedness. Out of everyone, he was the only one who was a playboy. He naturally wanted to be high-profile and attract everyone's attention. There was no concept of moral integrity. There was only the instinct to emit hormones everywhere. As a result, after the infection, all his hormones could only be directed at one person. It was single-mindedly influencing all his actions now, including those who weren't by Wei Wei. He looked down on them. Wei Wei Bai was filling in the report while paying attention to the progress of the few mutants. A portion of the monsters had already been sold. The base was now filthy rich. Because of the battle with the Monster King, the reputation of their base had spread throughout the apocalyptic world. Without Dawa, Wei Wei Bai had to work hard to keep an eye on him. If things got chaotic, it would be troublesome for her to lead a good life. Just as he stopped writing, he heard a system notification. Your second peacock baby is here. He spread his wings and spread his wings all the way, practically turning himself into a doomsday idol. Wei Wei Bai paused. As expected, she heard many people screaming and exclaiming. She looked from afar. At the entrance of the laboratory, a slender and perfect figure appeared. It was as if he had come against the light, and he was as handsome as a god. That cold and indifferent face, however, carried a faintly discernible evil energy. Every step she took seemed to radiate a brilliant light in all directions. He set off everyone like a clown duck, a backdrop. Did he change his style? Zero walked in front of Wei Wei Bai, stretched out his finger, and casually tugged his collar. He was just short of putting seduction on his face. His low and hoarse voice, as gorgeous as a cello, made people's ears tingle. Your body is not good. Don't be so tired. Chapter 2194. These words were domineering and gentle. Ever since Erwa appeared, Wei Wei Bai felt that she was being challenged every moment. This was the extreme reaction of encountering a super actor. Unfortunately, she was now the flower of the high mountain, the king of facial paralysis, so she could only put on a disgusted expression. Otherwise, she would also pull her collar, and it would be hard to tell who was seducing who. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's calm face, Zero stretched out his finger and casually slid it down from her shoulder. That faintly discernible contact. Wei Wei Bai immediately stepped back and said to the seduced assistant beside her, "Continue the experiment." The assistants immediately woke up, blushing and looking down. They continued the experiment just now. Behind the reinforced glass wall was a mercenary preparing to be transformed by the supernatural ability. Their base's supernatural ability transformation was already very mature. The experiment was not that painful, so all the mercenaries who wanted power automatically became the test subjects. Zero saw that she was ignoring him. He touched his face and frowned. She didn't like this. Did she really like the little retard? Zero saw that she had lowered her head and was seriously recording the data. Her calm and pale side profile had a fragile and determined beauty. He leaned against the glass wall with his arms crossed, looking so lazy that he did not look serious. Even if he wanted to pretend to be cold, he did it in a particularly outrageous way. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was ignoring him, Zero once again felt that his charm had lost its effect. His beautiful eyes narrowed dangerously, like the eyes of a poisonous snake, cold and strange. Wei Wei Bai suddenly saw Zero's finger drawing circles on the glass wall, as if he was bored. Then, every time he drew circles, the subject inside would convulse. The instrument would make a sharp sound that indicated that his life was in danger. Wei Wei Bai quickly realized that something was wrong. She looked up at him, her eyes cold and warning. Enough, don't mess around. Zero slowly retracted his hand and stared at the anger in her eyes. He smiled and said, "Am I not helping you speed up the progress?" He sped up the experiment for the subject's own good. Of course, if he couldn't endure it and died, it would be because his body was too weak. Looking at Zero's mischievous and vicious little temper, he thought to himself. Wei Wei Bai said helplessly, "What do you want? If you're bored, then go outside and fight monsters. Don't bother me. I'm really not interested in you." This was a blatant slap to the face. He stepped on Zero's charm several times and threw it into the trash can. The system, who was holding the terubozu, and munching on a banana, said, "You still need to increase your favorability. The other party is a narcissistic peacock demon. You just need to praise him more." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head calmly. "Don't worry. It's precisely because he's a narcissist that we can't spoil him. We have to attack him. Everyone loves him. I'm the only one who's different from the other flirtatious sluts. It's no wonder he treats me differently." The system said, "It's him. It was just that he was worried about overstimulating the masochist." The host always had the ability to stimulate the masochist into a super S. This second baby's personality did not seem to be a good person. If it weren't for the fact that Wei Wei Bai was holding an empty balloon in her stomach, she would vomit blood at every turn. Second baby probably would not have been so obedient and not touched her. Wei Wei Bai did not pay much attention to second baby. Instead, she was thinking more about who should she increase her favorability to first. Third baby's favorability was 80 points, and he was simple-minded. However, he did not come out. With second baby's restless personality, it would not be easy to increase his score. If eldest baby was still here, the rate of increase should start to increase. Button, comma. Chapter 2195. After all, although Dawa's state was rational, once he set his heart on someone, he would begin to focus. She counted the time and felt that she should have a miscarriage. Otherwise, the strategy time would basically be compressed to a few months. After thinking for a long time, Wei Wei Bai seemed to accidentally glance at Erwa. She found that this man's eyes were deep with a trace of greed and was quietly looking at her. It was like a colorful and terrible poisonous snake waiting for her to show a flaw and swallow her. Wei Wei Bai immediately touched her stomach, but she still didn't want to have a miscarriage. This guy looked like a master who forced himself on her. Zero's ability was against the heavens, so when the time came, she would have no place to run. Wei Wei Bai really couldn't bring up any enthusiasm for this person with a split personality. So she continued to follow the manual system, eating and waiting to die. Let's take one step at a time. Wei Wei Bai finished the experiment, and after the ability test subjects came out, they all nodded to her to show respect. She politely smiled back. As a result, the atmosphere suddenly dropped, and all the test subjects ran away, trembling. Zero, who had been leaning against the glass, showed a dangerous smile at this moment, and that seductive but twisted eyes made people shudder. He stared at Wei Wei Bai's polite smile that couldn't be put away in time. The girl was a little weak, but her face was very calm, and she had always been serious and expressionless. She was polite to everyone, including him, so it was better to always be expressionless. Why did she have to smile at others? Zero's smile was unusually cold and vicious. He suddenly reached out, lifted her chin, and said slowly, "Don't smile at others in the future. I don't like it." His dislike was accompanied by a terrible desire to destroy, and he wouldn't suppress himself like the main personality. Wei Wei Bai's smile disappeared. She looked at him expressionlessly, and there was no trace of emotion in her cold eyes. Then she stretched out her fingers, little by little, and pushed them away. "Let me remind you, as your creator, I at least deserve a trace of your respect." As she spoke, she indifferently adjusted her sleeves. Then, she threw the experimental data file to the assistant beside her and turned around to leave coldly and arrogantly. Zero's fingers were empty. Her fingertips were almost forcefully breaking it open. Her fingernails were scraping his skin. If it weren't for the fact that his physical body was too strong, his skin would have been torn and he would have bled. Zero slowly retracted his finger. His actions were casual, but at the same time, there was an evil look in his eyes. He placed his finger on his lips and licked it lightly with the tip of his tongue. It was as if it wanted to lick all the traces of her scent into its stomach. Respect. Ling tilted her head slightly and smiled until her eyes were curved. Her eyes were filled with a seductive light. "Oh, what's that? I just want you, that's all." Zero's voice was low and deep. It gave off a dark and enchanting charm. Then, he took a step forward and slowly followed after him. It was as if they were chasing after their prey. They were very careful and kept following him. Wei Wei Bai had just walked out of the laboratory when she saw the leader of the mercenary group running towards her. He was fully armed and had a laser cannon in his hand. There were hundreds of mercenaries following behind him. All of them were on high alert. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, the team leader immediately reported, "We've been attacked by more than 10 bases. We're going to guard the door now." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "How are the casualties so far?" Chapter 2196. There are no casualties yet. The other party hasn't launched a large-scale attack yet, but the team leader blabbered for a while. After hurriedly reporting, he immediately ran to guard the door with his men. Because this doomsday sandstorm was too serious, it caused all the bases to fall into trouble except for their base. Although their base had a very good reputation. But when it came to life and death, those bases couldn't care less. They tried to capture their base as quickly as possible and get the huge amount of supplies in their warehouse. Under the leadership of the largest and most ferocious base, those base mercenaries had already killed their way to a kilometer away. With more than a dozen bases united, the number of people must be in the tens of thousands. Their base only had a few thousand people, and hundreds of them were civilian staff who maintained the base, and 100 or so were from the experimental group. If they gathered together and fought with others, it wouldn't be good for them. Even if it was troublesome to capture them, even if they wanted to live a peaceful life, it wouldn't be peaceful. Wei Wei Bai's expression was still calm, but there was worry in her eyes. She was just about to follow those mercenaries out. A pair of hands gently wrapped around her neck from behind. He pushed her back and bound her in a gentle and strong embrace. Zero smiled brightly, and his brownish-red eyes were full of greed and suppressed emotions. He lowered his head and rubbed her hair innocently and passionately, like an obedient big cat. "Wei Wei, do you need help? I can help you." His coquettishness was completely different from Fourth Baby. It was with a sense of bewitchment. Was it exuding a sense of depravity with bad intentions? Wei Wei Bai stood quietly for a while. The breathing of the man behind her gradually deepened. Finally, her eyelashes trembled, and there was a trace of hesitation in her clear eyes. "What do you want?" If Dewan made a move, she didn't need to worry at all, because he didn't beat around the bush and would only deal with things rationally. But Erwa was different. Let him do things. If he didn't give something, he definitely wouldn't move. Zero's smile became even happier. His words contained laughter, and there was a trace of twisted excitement. "You have to make me happy." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Be more specific. What do you mean by happy?" Ling pursed his thin lips and whispered into her ear, "Just make me smile. After all, I'm not an insensible person. I won't make things difficult for you." Wei Wei Bai seemed to be in a difficult position. This kind of request, she took 2 steps forward and released herself from his arms. Then, she turned around and carefully sized him up for a while before revealing a faint smile. "Is it enough to make you laugh?" Her attitude was easygoing, her smile was pure, and the gentleness under her indifference was so moving. Zero's long eyelashes drooped down, suppressing the greed and twisted emotions in her eyes. He nodded lightly. Wei Wei Bai suddenly took a few steps forward and reached under his arm, touching the sensitive flesh on the side of his sturdy waist. her fingernails lightly scratched. Like an electric shock, the numbness spread from Zero's back to the top of his head. His pursed lips curled up almost instinctively. Even those bewitching eyes of his also curled up. He was caught off guard by this stroke and was amused. Although he did not laugh out loud, he could not hide his smile. Wei Wei Bai calmly retracted her hand. "All right, you're laughing. Go and help." Ling pursed his lips and held his breath. His eyes were wide open. "You cheated, Wei Wei Bai, as long as you're laughing." Ling, the forward slash. Chapter 2197. Seeing her look like she had won, Zero couldn't help but mutter, "But I'm not happy." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while and showed a disdainful expression. "If you can't do it, then so be it. Maybe this personality of yours doesn't know anything and used all his strength to open the screen." Although he couldn't compare to the main personality, he still had the power of the hungry personality. But he was also very powerful. Zero suddenly pursed his lips and smiled dangerously and charmingly. His fingers were very sticky as he held her hand and rubbed her palm with his fingertips. Then he pulled her and walked out. "It's because of you that I fell for this clumsy, psychological trick." On the noisy, dusty ground, there were all kinds of aircrafts and chariots on the ground. This time, their base was really in the limelight. They had swallowed too many resources. This caused this group of people who couldn't win against the monsters to actually use their own people. It seemed that benefits were still the most tempting. In the past, how could they be so united? With the temptation of absolute benefits, there was a united bandit behavior. Wei Wei Bai didn't even walk out of the door before the base gate was locked. Zero stood outside the transparent door and raised his hand to his forehead. A shadow fell on his beautiful eyes. There was a hint of gloominess and coldness. The smile on his lips was still lazy and evil. "You're now a burden. Don't come out and cause trouble. I'll treat you to the grand fireworks later." After saying that, Zero disappeared. Wei Wei Bai silently took out a bag of jerky snacks from her pocket and pulled a chair over to eat leisurely. There was a special ability that could cheat a target that was similar to a god. It would be a waste of such a special ability if she didn't use it. So Wei Wei Bai was very calm and even used the communicator. She told the guards outside to not go up and fight and to be cautious. If there was danger, they should retreat. She just let Zero go alone. Wasn't this a stage for him to show off his ability because he was awesome? The system looked at the idle host. He didn't do his job and was so bored that green mold grew on his head. The corners of its mouth twitched and it was about to say something. However, he suddenly remembered that he still had a bag of melon seeds that was about to expire, so he immediately dug it out and ate it. The host and the system, who were eating snacks, both looked like salted fish in a daze. Just like those old employees who had been at the bottom for 20 years, their souls and bodies had been separated by laziness and numbness. They were just short of walking corpses. What the hell is diligence? It was better to eat snacks. She originally thought that the mercenaries would attack soon. In the end, they dug a trench not far from their base, intending to build a protective wall. It was as if they were also afraid that if they fought to the death, it would take too long. Therefore, they first set up a camp to retreat and rest. Wei Wei Bai finished her jerky and was drinking water. A pair of gentle and nimble arms suddenly reached out from behind and hugged her. Zero lazily rested his head on her shoulder. He opened his thin lips slightly and almost licked her ear as he said, I've prepared the fireworks. Come with me to take a look." Wei Wei Bai frowned and turned to look at him. "What did you do?" Zero's eyes were bewitching as he smiled maliciously. "Look." Zero stretched out his finger and flicked it lightly. A transparent ray of light that flashed under the light appeared. His voice was so indifferent, as if he didn't care at all. "I can control people's hearts and energy. Everything in the world is at my fingertips." He was like an emotionless god, without any fluctuations of emotion. Chapter 2198. He was just stating a terrifying fact. What was even more frightening than his calmness was that he was even speaking in a teasing tone. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless, but she stared at his fingertips in a daze. She muttered softly, "What kind of monster have I created?" Zero didn't like to hear this sentence. He was so handsome. How did he look like a monster? Zero narrowed his eyes dangerously and covered her lips with his fingertips. He rubbed against her hair, and his tone became sinister. "Yes, sometimes I feel like a monster too. Do you regret creating me?" The last sentence was regret. His voice was low, but it was cold to the bone. He was asking her, but he didn't give her a chance to answer. Zero's reddish-brown eyes were even colder. "It's a pity that you don't have a chance to regret." He didn't want to hear her answer, because in this world, anyone could regret seeing him. Only she, their creator, couldn't feel a trace of regret. She felt a little regretful. He wanted to kill someone just thinking about it. Wei Wei Bai couldn't open her mouth. She could only stare at him with her eyes wide open. Zero exchanged glances with her. Her clear eyes reflected his enchanting and beautiful face. After looking at her for a long time, he felt that she was actually very cute. Thus, Zero's gaze slowly changed. It became hot and flirtatious. The corners of his eyes also became brighter. Seeing that there was something wrong with his gaze, Wei Wei Bai immediately retracted her gaze. She was calm and indifferent. Zero seemed to feel that it was a pity and sighed softly. He seemed to like it when she glared at him angrily. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had calmed down, he smiled and carried her up. He disappeared from the spot. When they reappeared, they were already standing on the rooftop of the tallest building in the base. The sky was gloomy. Thick dark clouds floated in the sky. Below the clouds, the enemy was building a military camp in full swing. Zero put her on the rooftop, stretched out his finger, and gently placed it on her lips. "Listen." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Zero's mouth curved. Like a gorgeous actor, he stretched out his finger and tapped lightly. The sound of death. Bang! A campsite was suddenly torn apart by some kind of power, causing the space to distort. In the background of the raging fire, God Zero was tall and slender. He had one hand in his pocket, and his eyes were still lazy. Does it sound good? His smile was filled with contempt for the weak, but more than that, he was trying to please her. Wei Wei Bai was not in the mood to sympathize with the enemy. After all, she was a crazy female scientist in this plane. God knows how many experimenters had abused him. Therefore, she narrowed her eyes coldly and said, "Yes, it sounds nice." Zero's eyes lit up. He seemed to have done a lot of things. Finally, there was something that she liked. Zero smiled happily and suddenly raised his arms. It was as if he was commanding something. A bunch of transparent threads of power appeared from the newly established camp. Boom, boom, all of them burst into flames. Even the sky seemed to be shaken by this massive power, and the entire space seemed to be shaken by this terrifying power. As it continued to distort, the flames also turned into a vortex. The lives of countless enemies disappeared in an instant. It was like the end of the world. Everyone who was still alive was terrified. Even the enemies who were not dead immediately knelt down and wailed. They were completely scared out of their wits. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at the miserable situation in the distance, as well as the enemies who were suppressed before they could even fight. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.